We have Nantucket Islands Land Bank, all land bank properties continued until May 6th. Sweet Meadow Sylvia Lane LLC at 74 Westchester Street is continued until May 6th. And then under certificates of compliance, we have Sweet Meadow Sylvia Lane LLC at 74 Westchester Street, also continued until May 6th. So with that, we will begin under notices of intent. We have Nantucket Conservation Foundation, Capom Pond, and we have Naomi Valentine on representing this one.
Thank you. Again, just for the record, my name is Naomi Valentine. I work for SWCA Environmental Consultants, and I'm representing the Nantucket Conservation Foundation for their application to manage toxic algae and nutrients within Capom Pond. So we were continued from the last hearing because we hadn't heard back from Natural Heritage yet, but we did receive an email from Ms. Deanne of Natural Heritage outlining that there would be no take or impact regarding Natural Heritage or NISA. So we did present the general overview of the project in the last hearing, but I'll review it briefly and just respond to some of the comments from the last hearing and repeat the reasons why we're looking to propose this project or move forward with this project. So there are a variety of toxin-forming algae within Capom Pond. They've been present for a number of years and are fairly persistent. The toxins that those algae are capable of producing have also been identified within the pond, and they've been recently confirmed to be aerosolizing, which is one of the concerns specifically for cyanobacteria. There's links to more serious and prolonged human health concerns, also wildlife health. So currently the state of the pond is very poor quality. There are toxins present. The presence of the algae itself also is causing some other water quality issues, such as the elevated pH. And it also takes up a decent amount of dissolved oxygen when it goes through its life cycle. So it's not a great environment for any wildlife that are still persisting in there to date. And for those reasons, human health, aquatic life health, and just overall water quality of the system, we're proposing to conduct alum applications early in the season and also algae application only when there are algal blooms present. And the approach is to minimize the concentration or the application rate of those algicide treatments by timing it appropriately before the algae becomes widespread across the water body. Just checking my notes really quick. I did send out a supplemental piece of information to the Conservation Commission, unfortunately late last night because I lost power from the storm yesterday. But it was mostly just highlighting some of the specifics of the proposed products for this project and some additional supporting literature on application rates and potential impacts to non-target species, predominantly wildlife. And so, although I didn't put an exact limit beyond label restrictions in our original proposal, I proposed in the supplemental information that we limit the copper-based algicide to a 0.5 parts per million application, which is half of the max rate. We were never intending to apply at the max rate, and I think that we would be perfectly capable of managing the algae and staying underneath that concentration. The reason that concentration was selected is because there's literature supporting that even the most sensitive species that could be present within the pond, a Daphnia species, for example, should not be impacted by an application at that level. Furthermore, there is a very high affinity for the algae itself and for these copper-based algicides. And so the actual application that would persist in the water body would be significantly lower than that. We would, just as a reminder, only be treating half of the water body at once to ensure that there was no effect on dissolved oxygen that could be harmful to aquatic life. And there will be a continuation of the existing water quality testing that's going on, and we're also going to conduct earlier testing so that it can be used to inform treatment. So pre and post treatment water quality testing, and we'll be testing for pH and alkalinity and general observations during any of the treatments as well. I think that sort of sums it up, so I can take any specific questions or comments.
Thank you, Naomi. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Mark?
Yes, through the chair, what's the seasonality of the application of these chemicals?
We're hoping to conduct the alum treatment and first algicide application fairly soon as the algae appears to be forming. Whatever the timeline, if we receive approval, would allow. Those are commonly done in the early spring and then summer again if needed. The algicide application, we're hopeful that paired with the alum application will hold off that population from coming back for hopefully at least a couple of months, if not more sustained than that. But we would anticipate that there would likely need to be one follow-up this season, since there is a very dense and persistent population of algae within the pond now.
Thank you, Naomi. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Ian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Naomi, in reading about the sediment sampling, I was curious that when you mentioned the high phosphorus, that both the two possible causes were considered development or geological causes. Could you expand on that, please? The geological aspect?
I have to be honest, that's not my area of expertise, and I had a colleague write that section, so I'm going to scroll to it right now.
Well, that's all right. I don't want to hold things up. I just was really surprised that sort of development, you look at a Google satellite and those bright green lawns all the way around it and the watershed, and yet somehow development is given a pass, when I would have thought that would be the most likely explanation. And so that puzzled me.
Well, I wouldn't say that development is given a pass, but I will say that there are active conversations with all the landowners surrounding the pond, and just to get a better handle of what their lawn and other landscape maintenance is. And I'm not sure if Jen would be able to respond to that more specifically on how that's developing, but it's our understanding that either most of those homeowners, and maybe I should wait until Jen can comment if she'd like to. I wouldn't say that the report was trying to insinuate that human presence around the pond is not a cause, but if you're talking about overground flow of water, there is a pretty significant buffer, including a very thick border of Phragmites, which is very efficient at nutrient uptake. And so it didn't seem as that it should be the only cause that we look into.
Thank you, Naomi. Jen, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure, thank you, Ashley. Ian, as far as the site goes and in that report, I agree with what Naomi is saying, as we weren't necessarily discounting the sources of phosphorus. Development certainly is most likely a source of phosphorus, at least historic phosphorus around the pond, but also the soils on Nantucket, as you probably remember, are fairly high in natural phosphorus as it is. It's usually not a fertilizer we need to add. So those two sources are most likely both contributing to the pond, but we haven't done, kind of the watershed analysis work to move past what the actual historic or current sources of phosphorus are. This proposal that Naomi is putting forward for NCF is focusing on, what can we treat right now as far as the harmful algal blooms, and then NCF working with the Land Council and their, extended monitoring out at this site, are speaking with the, surrounding homeowners and potentially exploring future kind of watershed analysis of, if there's, point sources for phosphorus coming in, what are the steps that we need to take to look at that larger scale. But all of those are most likely both development and that historic soil movement of water bringing phosphorus into the pond. Those are all likely contributing to what's in the sediment there, Ian.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. Mark, I'm sure, also remembers when kids used to, swim in that pond. So, I mean, so there's been substantial degradation. I do have a tangential question. How high is it above sea level? Do you have any idea?
It is not very far off from the sea level, but we didn't get a precise measurement.
Right. And so I'm wondering why one couldn't just open the pond to being flushed out. So is there any reason why that couldn't be done?
Well, there's a significant amount of potentially hazardous biomass in there at this point. So I don't think it would be a good proposal to flush it into the ocean there. So it's not something that I would recommend. I don't think it would be something that'd be easily allowed either.
Thank you, Naomi. Seth, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Some people may know this, but Capon Pond was the original harbor of Nantucket, but it's not really the applicant's ability, at least as far as I understand the regulations, to open the pond to the ocean. That would require coordination with the town through the permitting process through the state that allows ponds to be open. So I think that's a much larger conversation if it was ever to be undertaken. I know that pond opening in general has been raised as a water quality mitigation strategy, but I don't think it's necessarily germane to this specific application.
Thank you, Seth. Any other comments or questions from commissioners? Looks like no. Jeff, do we have any comments or questions from the public?
Yes, we just have a comment from RJ Turka of the Nantucket Land Council. And he wrote that the Nantucket Land Council is actively working with the abutters of Capon Pond to address their land use practices so we can address Capon on a watershed scale for long-term water quality improvements. We support this notice of intent in the short term, as watershed-wide long-term improvements will not help Capon Pond this year. That was it.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff, do we have everything we would need to close this one?
Yes.
Okay, so if there are no other questions or comments from commissioners, Naomi, would you like to close?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, is there a motion to close?
Motion to close.
Motion made by Joe, it looks like seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
That carries unanimously. Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Have a great evening, everyone.
You too. All right, that moves us on to Town of Nantucket, Cow Pond Lane. And we have Stephen Reichert and Robert McNeil on for this one.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Conservation Commission. Rob McNeil with Nantucket DPW. And I believe when we opened, we had a brief discussion about the project, but did not have a DEP file number. The file number has now been received and has been presented, and we are moving forward with discussions. Since our last meeting, we've had our consultant put together a more defined planting of the proposed improvements to the existing detention basin, and that includes a pretty hardy landscape architect's density planting based on some recommended plantings from both Mass DEP as well as the Nantucket Land Council for rain garden status. So that's probably the only change that's really occurred. But I'd let Steve make any additional comments, and certainly try to answer any questions that the commission may have.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And yeah, we were last heard before you guys on the March 25th meeting, and the only comment that really resulted from the previous hearing was to provide some rain garden plantings in the infiltration basin. So our landscape architect has come up with a plan that, as you just saw, and we hope to address that. And we did need a DEP file number, which we've received since the last meeting as well.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? It looks like Seth, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the applicant for going forward with the rain garden. I'm just wondering, has that plan come into the office? Because I'm not sure if it's in the packet or not.
We just received it yesterday and forwarded it on to Jeff and Joanne this morning or this afternoon. We just received it, so you probably did not receive it before this meeting tonight.
We do have it. I will confirm that.
All right, and the planting list on it looks good?
All right, that's a good question because I obviously didn't see the plan for that either. But it looks like we got the thumbs up from Jeff. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? And I do really appreciate you guys adding the rain garden component because I know I was pushing for it last time. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
All right, Jeff, it looks like we don't have any other questions from commissioners. Do we have any questions from the public on this one?
No, ma'am.
Okay, and do we have everything we'd need to close? Okay,
Yes.
Rob, would you like to close?
Yes, please.
Okay, is there a motion to close? Motion made by Mark, seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, that carries unanimously. And that moves us on to Town of Nantucket DPW Surfside Beach, also represented by Stephen Reichert and Rob McNeil.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
So the improvements that we're looking to take on in the Surfside concession area include a wraparound extension of the deck on the building itself, as well as an extension of the catch basin that historically it's a infiltrating catch basin that, let's say, infiltrates, but with some of the intensities of the rains that we see, doesn't infiltrate fully immediately. And so we end up with a fair amount of ponding while that infiltrator does its job. So the idea would be to provide an overflow from that infiltrating catch basin in the center of the parking lot to another infiltrator just off the end of the parking lot in the direction of the beach to, let's sort of just be an outlet for that infiltrator to provide additional infiltration outside of the parking lot. So the wraparound deck was a discussion that came out of the both functionality of the facility, providing a direct accessible route from the handicap parking on the eastern side of the building and parking area up to the concession spot instead of routing them currently through the parking area. But most importantly is what we've noticed over the years is that some folks come up from the beach and go behind the building through the dune to get to the eastern side of the parking lot. So what we're hoping to achieve with this project is to essentially cut off access through the dunes and encourage rather those same people to be able to get up a short stairway to a deck that would provide an access all the way around the building and keep people out of the dunes. So we were able to achieve this with the plans that were produced for the deck itself, provided the pilings for the deck it's a cantilever design so that we're not going out any further than is currently disturbed, and the deck itself would extend sort of out over the pile to be able to, in the detail in the upper right there, it kind of shows you the short section of cantilever. So there's a move to also improve the railing system and to again provide a handicap accessible ramp on the eastern side down to the handicap parking area.
On the stormwater portion of the project, the parking lot right now, any rainfall over about half an inch floods that parking lot, and it takes up to 72 hours for that water to eventually infiltrate through that structure, the existing structure. So, our improvements are to add an oil and grit separator, and then also another infiltrating structure. And all three structures out there now will start providing some treatment to the stormwater. There'll be a hood on the existing infiltrating catch basin. The oil grit separator will provide some treatment, and then the new infiltration structure will also provide some treatment to the stormwater. When everything is done and constructed, the only things you'll see out there in the area adjacent to the deck, the proposed deck, are two manhole covers. So the impacts to the area next to that the beach access path are fairly minimal after construction is complete. All of these proposed improvements are within the 100-foot buffer for the coastal dunes. The part of the portions of the deck and some of the infiltration structure are within the 50-foot buffer. So with that, do you guys have any questions for us?
Yeah, are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Although I support the overall idea of wanting to improve drainage in the site, I'm concerned about adding additional structure within the 50-foot buffer to the coastal dune, especially with regards to the wraparound deck. I don't see any request for a waiver within the submission, which would be required for this type of work. Any new structure within a 50-foot buffer to the coastal dune is not compliant with our performance standards, and there needs to be a justification as to why that's needed through a waiver request. And I don't necessarily see the benefit of increasing the deck area behind that structure, other than from like a concessions perspective, but from a natural resource management perspective, I see that as going to be detrimental to the resource areas that we protect.
Thank you, Seth. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Joe?
Yeah, I piggyback on what Seth just said. I think that the south side deck is a little too big. I could see, something, 5 to 5.5 feet, enough for a wheelchair to turn around. But after that, I just don't really see the use of it. I think if it's an access to the bathrooms, then just make it a walkway, not really a deck or patio. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I have to say I agree with Seth and Joe, and I am very uncomfortable with that deck expansion. I had actually talked at a meeting, I think this fall, about the Surfside site and about all the walking off the paths. I think during commissioners' comments, and I feel like as part of this proposal, you should actually be proposing some sort of like roped walkway leading to the beach so that people don't deviate. And that should keep people out of the dune area. But I definitely see that as problematic. And then I had a question about the stormwater management. My I guess knowledge of stormwater management comes more from city settings where they would put all of the infiltration like under the parking lot. So you wouldn't actually have to go further or closer to the dune area. Was that ever looked at to have like compensatory storage underneath the parking lot so that it's all under the hardscaping?
Sure. So I'm happy to address any of these questions. So the parking lot currently has not just the septic system for the facility, but it also has the well, the public well. So pushing the water away is, I think, that was, and there's a disturbed area already along the dune that was cited as the spot for this to go. That's why this was chosen the way it was. With regard to the deck itself, the concessionaires over the years have changed their practices to include a food truck located on the eastern side of the site, just past the handicap accessible parking area. And over there is included a grassed picnic table seating area, which has continued to encourage people to come around the building from various from the parking lot side as well as the back side of the building. And so we have noticed this increase in traffic, in foot traffic, finding their way to that space. The idea of coming off the back of the building as wide as we have was discussed with our architects, and essentially includes space for the showers, the outdoor showers that are already there on the back side of the deck, but it also takes into account wheelchair passage, as well as the idea of opposite the shower area on the back corner of the building would be a bench, a sitting area that was imagined for elderly that are not making it to the beach, but be able to sit and enjoy viewing the beach, and just taking in the scenery where there's not a lot of opportunity to do that with the current deck configuration. And so the combination of allowing ADA passage as well as a sitting area for folks on the back of the building, and the continued practice of the shower on the back side of the building as people exited the beach was what was in mind. Again, the width off the building was talked about with Jeff to specifically be able to cut off the continuous use of that area for pedestrians through the dunes, to stop the practice that you're looking to protect, to protect the resource by doing this. That was ultimately the intent and the background on how the width was chosen.
Thank you. And I totally appreciate that you're trying to cut off pedestrian access back there, but I think people just need better training in general on that site. I really hadn't, I live in Surfside, so I walk up that trail quite frequently, and hadn't since last summer with all the COVID action. And I was really blown away by how the public encroached into the dunes within the last year. So I think really a better plan for the whole way down to the beach needs to be addressed. because I think people will still walk wherever they want to walk, you know. And I'm also worried the disturbed area that you're talking about, I think it was disturbed a lot this past summer with pedestrian traffic. So that's kind of got to be addressed again, that whole way down, I think. Yes, Rob?
So, Madam Chair, I know a lot of the, so we do have an annual beach management meeting coming up. Most, if not all, of the beach access post and rope work that is done is performed by the harbor master and her crew through the Marine Department. We're happy to, work together to have that happen if that's something that the commission is looking to incorporate here or have to better control and direct people to and from the beach. I also know that that is a emergency access where the patrols, the CSOs, and lifeguards come and go. So there are ATVs and full-size vehicles that enter the beach at that location. But pedestrian access behind the building specifically has been something I've noticed from my first season here 5 years ago. And while maybe it was something that you've noticed recently as maybe been exacerbated, it's certainly something that's been worn into that dune behind the building. It's something that has been on our radar for some time now.
Thank you. Seth, and then Joe.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Rob, for sharing those pieces of information. I do think that the access behind the building that you're talking about in the resource area is a concern, but I think it could be dealt with fencing and signage way outside of the 50-foot buffer rather than the deck that's proposed. And I think that if the idea is to increase the deck to, have additional amenities and ADA access to the concession stand, all of those activities could take place on the parking lot side of the building rather than on the dune side of the building, and provide in almost every case an equivalent function. I understand the showers are there, so maybe not relocating them, but you could provide an ADA view shed on the parking lot side. You could provide additional gathering space on the parking lot side. I think everything that wants to be done can be done to the north, and then just fencing off outside of the 50-foot buffer and installing signage, say this is a dune restoration project, or this is a protected resource, do not trample on the site, would do the same, it would have the same desired effect, in my opinion.
Thank you, Seth. Joe?
Madam Chair, 2 points of clarity. One, I don't know if Joanne could bring up the site plan for where the well is located. And then number 2, do we have a photo of where the showers are? The only thing I saw was just a hose bib. So I'm just a little confused on where the showers are. Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I believe the well is located in the building footprint. And I believe that I don't remember the other part of that question. I'm sorry.
Outdoor shower.
Sorry, thank you. The outdoor shower has a foot shower and a full-size head shower off the back.
I only noticed the foot one, sorry. Yeah, that's all I saw. And like, I went out there, but then in that photograph, all I see is the hose bib, and then it's on the architectural just as a hose bib, not a shower head. And I didn't know if that could be located on to the north side of the structure.
Sure.
Just, yeah.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, there is a hose bib on the rear of the building on the east side that is different and separate from the showers.
Thank you for clarifying that. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Mark?
Should we pursue the issue of no waiver request? And there maybe should be if we're going to build a deck there.
I think that is, yes, something that this applicant should look to deal with. I think I would also like to see on the plan where that well is located, and some of the other justification for not having infiltration just under the parking lot, I think would be helpful. Yep, Mark?
Just on my packet, I have pages 24, 5, 6, and 7 are all blank under Appendix E. Is it just my copy that didn't come through? There's no copies of any of the plans, just a lot of narrative, but no copies. The
No, I think
Stormwater
we-
Management Report, separately bound, Attachment E, that's blank. Site plans, separately bound, Attachment F is blank.
There are 3 items for this in the packet because they have trouble loading if they get too big. So if you go back to the original 422 page, you'll see the Surfside Beach Part 1, which is the information, and then Appendix E is Part 2, which is just the stormwater report.
Okay,
And
I
then
just
the other
downloaded.
appendix is the site plan. So there's 3 separate items there.
Thought they were separate applications, sorry.
No problem. It just, the file altogether was just too big.
Rob?
Madam Chair, I would say that we were unaware of the waiver requirement. We're certainly happy to work with Jeff to get that submitted. I would say at this point, it'd be helpful to continue this to the next opportunity, and we'll get that submitted.
Okay, just see if we have any public comment and make sure commissioners have all their questions to you so you're ready for the next meeting, and then we will certainly continue. Ian?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Through you to Rob. In light of what you've heard from the other commissioners, would rotating the building be a possibility, or would that be considered automatically too expensive? So it's not a very large building, and right now where the western porch is, if that was rotated to the south, you would avoid the waiver, you'd avoid all the problems that are being referred to, and would give seating for people my age to view the ocean. So I'm just, just brainstorming here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Rob, had you guys looked at reorienting that building at all?
So the building itself is part of a 3-site master plan effort that is just kicked off. That's going to be focused on Jetties Beach first, Children's Beach, and then Surfside. I would say that this modification to the deck is definitely going to be considered a short-term investment here. As we look to reimagine the entire, all of the concessions in a longer term discussion about reinvesting and reconfiguring possibly each of the concession sites. We've gotten lots of different ideas from former and current concessionaires. We've gotten lots of feedback during our Parks and Rec master planning effort that did include discussions about concessions through our both our online surveys, our public information sessions, and from lots of boards and committees that were involved in that session, in that planning effort. So what you're seeing now is really the low-hanging fruit, if it were, to address the major concerns of the users of the facilities, and that's along with just normal maintenance and upkeep and improvements and coordinations that we've had with Jeff and me and our departments. So there's expected, probably 5 years down the road that we'll have, some other more meaningful look at the future of Surfside. But until then, this is basically to take care of some of the major issues that are ongoing that continue to be a challenge out there.
Thank you, Rob. Any other kind of final questions or comments from commissioners? Looks like no. Jeff, do we have any comments from the public on this one? No. Okay. So Rob, then you would like to continue until May 6th with this one?
Yes, please.
Okay. So this will continue until May 6th. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And that moves us on to Stillwater's nominee trust at 7 Wama Squid Place. And this is represented by David Haynes.
Good evening. Thank you for looking at this. This is a notice of intent to install a sewer connection at 7 Wama Squid Place. There's currently a sewer connection in the end of the cul-de-sac at Wama Squid, and the lot is on a septic system. Due to site constraints, the sewer line will run along the edge of the driveway, and because the utilities are on the other side of the driveway, it has to be on the wetland side of the driveway. So it's right next to the wetland boundary. It's a bordering vegetated wetland shrub swamp. And it's sort of a little grass verge in that area. And they're going to run it down to this. There'll be a silt fence erected as shown on the plan along the edge. The spoil pile will be placed in the driveway. The sewer line will be put in, and then it will be backfilled and stabilized. All soils will be stable, but prior to the removal of the silt fence. Because of the close proximity of water table, some of the work may occur in the water table. We are asking for a waiver to install it. There may be some temporary dewatering that has to be done. There is a dewatering discharge point shown on there with a filter bag and surrounded by silt fence in the lawn area. Again, it would be just a temporary situation where we pump during construction. It may not be necessary if it's done at the right time of year and the water table is low enough. And then no pumping, no permanent dewatering will be necessary. Waivers may be granted because of two reasons: no reasonable alternative, and no impact to the resource area, and also for a significant improvement to the resource area. Eliminating the septic system is generally considered to be an improvement, and there is no alternative to get the sewer out to the road and keep it out of the water table. It has to be down at a certain depth. It's fairly straightforward. Usually these things are handled with a notice of RDA if possible, but since the close proximity, it was thought that it should be as a notice of intent. And that is my presentation. Anybody have any questions?
Thank you, David. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Looks like no. Jeff, do we have any comments from the public on this one?
You do not, and you do have all of the required information.
David, would you like to close?
Good to me. I guess I didn't make anybody curious.
Is there a motion to close?
To close.
I'm going to give it to Ian. He had his hand up first, and then Joe, I'll give you the second. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Right, that carries unanimously. Thank you, David.
Very much and have a good evening. And I want to give a shout out to all the old people that need a bench out there.
We hope you have a good evening too.
We'll save you a spot.
All right, so that moves us on to Nantucket Island's Land Bank, Clifford Street, southern end of Lover's Lane. And we have Art Gasparo on representing this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is for the set of stairs replacement at the location which the land bank refers to as Footsteps, sort of east of Fisherman's. And again, we are outside of the resource area. The coastal dune is at the base of these steps. And we were waiting for a file number, which I believe has issued, and we're happy to address any questions or concerns that you may have.
Thank you, Art. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Looks like no. Jeff, do we have any questions or comments from the public?
Nope, and you got all of the required information.
Perfect. Art, would you like to close?
Yes, please.
Okay, is there a motion to close? Motion made by Dave, seconded by Mark. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Right, that carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that moves us on to Nantucket Island's Land Bank, Matacasham Valley Road, also represented by Art Gasparo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is also another set of beach stairs for the public use on land bank property. This project is a little bit different in that we actually are within the resource area because we have a coastal bank. But in this case, what's being proposed is a seasonal set of aluminum stairs, which could be removed so that they're essentially not lost to erosion. There's already current footpaths that head over to this area where people are kind of going down over onto NCF property, which you can see in the aerial, and then, down the bank and kind of just making their way. So the hope is to keep this on the land bank property. It's essentially there would have to be a fairly short trail cut off of the existing trail that would go to this set of stairs. What we're proposing is an aluminum platform as well, so that we wouldn't actually have to create a deck. And then the same company, which we included the details of, that makes the stairs, makes this platform. And, it all kind of, bolts together and then can be removed. The platform is held in place just by pounding a couple of pipes, if you will, through the side grommets on the edge of the platform. So we think that it's a good solution for this location that's experiencing regular erosion. Will help keep the pedestrian activity off of the actual resource area and allow access to the beach. We'd be happy to address questions or concerns that you may have.
Thank you, Art. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? I know, Art, I just had one. I guess it's the footpaths that are to the west of where you're putting the stairs. I'm assuming those have too steep of a drop off right now, so people just aren't using them.
Yes, it's also much higher. So that's part of why we chose this location. The top of the bank is a little bit lower, and part of having these staircases is that they have to be handled by the staff and brought in and out of there. And so the weight that is included here. So obviously the The shorter the set of stairs, the better, essentially. So that's the reason for, you can see that I put spot elevations on the plan where the footpaths to the west or the top of the bank is up around elevation 28, whereas we're proposing the stairs, we're closer to 21.
Perfect. Thank you for explaining that a little bit more for me.
And if I may, Madam Chair, we will request a continuance because we are waiting on natural heritage. The section of, there's that little bit of a path that we want to cut as well. So we'll need to hear from them.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, do we have any comments from the public on this one?
No.
Okay, so it looks like there's no comments from commissioners. So Art, this will continue until May 6th?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And that moves us on to Jill Dean Shepherd at 12 and 14 Midland Avenue, represented by Paul Santos.
Thank you. On behalf of the applicant and one of the property owners, Jill Dean Shepherd, this is an application for the installation of a water service within a 100-foot buffer zone to the bordering vegetated wetland and within land subject to coastal storm flowage. The property actually, the application involves two properties, 12 Midland Avenue, in which Jill is the owner, and also 14 Midland Avenue, which is owned by Lawrence E. and Karen Flannery. Both of these properties, 12 and 14 Midland, while they have a Midland Avenue address, are remote to Midland Avenue, and they are basically accessed through a private easement and driveway that provides access to both of the properties. Because of that reason, when the newly installed water mains were placed out in Nantucket in this general vicinity, the water main location is located to the west, essentially, of the Shepherd property and the west of the 14 Midland Ave property within Columbus Avenue. If you look on the westerly end of the plan, you'll see Columbus Avenue. That's currently where the existing water service line has been run to. And corresponding water gates and shutoffs have been provided in that general location. So the intent of this plan is to get access or water service to 12 Midland. It does cross the 14 Midland property. The Flannerys were gracious enough to offer the Shepherds an easement over their property. The reason for that is while the Shepherds own property that does abut Columbus Avenue, when you look at the wetland to the southerly portion of this site, their property line or the access point to their property is a small flag area, which essentially is within the 25-foot no disturb and also within the 50-foot no build. So while we still need to come before you with this application, the fact that the Flannerys are granting the easement allows us to keep this work essentially outside of the 25, outside of the 50, and within only the 100-foot buffer zone, and also within land subject to coastal storm flowage, which there is no way to get out of that component of the application. The work itself will involve trenching for a 1-inch water service line. We have provided a 10-foot wide water easement, and that's the majority of the area that would need to be cleared. That area would be staked, it would be cleared, the water line would be placed below grade, provide the service to number 12. We would be providing a stub to number 14, which the Flannerys would then be able to use at a future date to provide water to their dwelling. Both of the properties now are accessed or utilize an existing on-site well with on-site septic. The excavation work would be, as I said, limited to trenching for the proposed water service line. We would stake the line and silt fencing would be placed along the southerly limit of the line, the entire length during the trenching operation. The trench itself would be a 3-foot wide trench in which the water main would then be, or the water service pipe would be placed inside of it. The area falls outside of jurisdiction of NHESP. We do have a DEP file number, and the intent would be, with permission from this board, to complete this work here as soon as an order of conditions would be issued and our staking has been completed. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. I think the application is pretty straightforward.
Thank you, Paul. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Looks like no. Jeff, do we have any questions or comments from the public?
No.
And do we have everything we'd need to close?
Yes.
Okay. Paul, would you like to close?
Yes, I would. Thank you.
Is there a motion?
Motion to close.
Motion made by Joe. It looks like seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Perfect. All right, that carries unanimously. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
And that moves us on to EPWL Polls LLC at 44, 46, 48, and 55 Warren's Landing, represented by Paul Santos.
Okay, again, thank you, Paul Santos, on behalf of the applicant, EPWL Polls LLC, which is a LLC formed by a group of homeowners on the Warren's Landing, Eel Point Road area. So while this project is a little bit more extensive than the limited amount of work that we have before you tonight, I'll explain the entire project to kind of give you a sense of what's happening here. This project is going to start at Warren's Landing Road, basically in the general vicinity of Richards Landing Road and Blue Heron Way, just around the corner from Fisher's Landing subdivision. That's the easterly end of this project. The project extends down Warren's Landing Road and then continues up Eel Point Road, terminating at approximately around 210 or 200 Eel Point Road. And what the project entails is the elimination of the overhead utility line that services all the properties in this general area. So those of you who are familiar with the area, for the most part, the area to the north is fully developed with residential properties. Warren's Landing Road on the southerly side up to about number 44, which is only about 2 or 3 houses in, is developed residentially. And the remainder of the project along the southerly side is vacant land owned by the Nantucket Conservation Foundation and also the Nantucket Land Bank. And the project itself is to eliminate all of the poles and the corresponding overhead wires and bury both the power, which would be National Grid, and the phone and cable, which would be Comcast. So at the end of the day, that area of Warren's Landing Road and Eel Point Road would be absent of the overhead wires and the poles. This was an effort started by a number of the Eel Point Road, Warren's Landing homeowners in an attempt to do away with this pole line, which ultimately we feel does enhance the wetland scenic views in this general area for the entire length of the road. The reason that we're before you is there is a portion of the project that falls within your jurisdiction. Specifically, there is a salt marsh to the southerly side of Warren's Landing Road and a small portion of Eel Point Road. That area occurs within one of the private property owners' land, Joseph DeLugo. It also affects both the Nantucket Conservation Foundation, Inc. property and also property owned by the Nantucket Islands Land Bank. All 3 of those owners have signed off and are applicants or owners as part of this application. So the area that's affected, again, starts at about 44 Warren's Landing Road and extends to the land bank property along the southerly side. The work that's involved here will be done in a few stages, but the intent is to take and install the underground service while the poles are obviously still in place. The underground service will be installed. And then once that is all installed, all the necessary equipment is in place for the underground service, the pole line will then be removed. So for the majority of the work will occur, the trenching will occur basically either within the existing traveled way of Eel Point Road and Warren's Landing Road, or in some cases just off to the shoulder between the edge of the traveled way and the existing pole line. So the work will be limited to those particular areas. There are cases where we now have transformers and equipment that are currently housed on top of the poles. For the most part, those will be buried. There will be a few instances where an electric transformer will need to be placed. Those will be placed in an appropriate cabinet on the backside of the traveled way, out of the traveled way, and out of an area that could provide a restriction for passing traffic. But again, this work will all be done first, then the poles would be removed. So the area that we're talking about that is within your jurisdiction is basically buffer zone work. We're not affecting any direct wetland area, which essentially would be the shrub area associated with the salt marsh. It would be work involved in within the buffer zone, both the 25 in some cases and also the 50 in some cases. Although that 50 no build there's no structures being proposed other than the utility cabinets and so forth. I have asked for a waiver to the extent that that's necessary. The waiver sets forth the provisions of your regulations, which we feel are applicable. In this case, quite honestly, I think we're applicable under 103 F3A, B, C, and D, which I think covers all of the requirements for waivers. We are asking for a waiver within the 25-foot no disturb for the removal of utility pole and installation of new underground distribution system. Within the 50-foot no build, removal of an existing utility pole and installation of new underground distribution system. And within the interests protected, in my opinion, the one that's most beneficial here would be the wetland scenic views, in which we feel the removal of the utility poles and associated overhead lines will have an overall beneficial impact to the wetland scenic views. Ultimately, we think there's a safety, there's also safety issues that are enhanced with the removal of the pole line, and a number of other issues too that may not be directly wetland related, but that we do feel are a benefit here by getting a removal of the pole line itself. We do have a DEP file number. The activity does fall within a mapped area and does require review by NHESP. It has been submitted to them. I've actually had a conversation with them today to answer some questions that they had. I do fully expect to have their review, which I believe will be a positive one, in hand for the next meeting. So we will be unable to close the meeting tonight, but obviously we wanted to make this presentation to you and answer any questions that commissioners may have. And happy to do so at this point.
Thank you, Paul. It looks like Joe has a question.
Not a question, more of a statement. Just with my dad being working for the electric company, one little perk of his job was we used to go out every once in a while if there's a power outage. And so one of the areas we would go to a lot was this road, believe it or not, with down power lines or one of the bells. I think the magnesium would be on fire. So it's pretty problematic for the electric company. I think for the scenic views, it'd be great to get rid of these, but I do know there is a safety hazard by these wires being up here in this location. So it'd be great if they could bury them. So my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Looks like no. Jeff, do we have any questions or comments from the public on this one? No. Okay. So since there are no questions, I guess Paul will continue this until May 6th, and we'll hope that you have heritage.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So that moves us on to Troja Nominee Trust at 26 Easy Street, represented by Art Gasparo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Arthur Reed is also here with me for this application. This is our third hearing on the proposal for the redevelopment of the property down on the corner of Easy Street and Oak Street. We have provided supplemental information in response to the comments at the last hearing. Everything that we previously proposed is still on the table as part of the application in terms of the increase of open space, the subsurface storage and infiltration facilities. And what we have added and provided for supplemental information is that we went back based on, the comments that we heard and tried to come up with a way to allow the floodwaters to go underneath this building and also be able to infiltrate. So the sketch that's before you right now shows that we would put grates on the outside of the building that would connect to perforated pipes that run into a gravel base below the slab. And what you can see is that on the left side of the sketch, the solid black line is the finished grade, essentially the sidewalk on two sides of the building, and then the driveway on one side and the open space on the other. And the slab that supports the interior of the structure, that you can see the bottom of that slab is actually above the exterior finished grade. So we would backfill the inside of the under that slab and inside of the structure with gravel, and then have perforated pipes connected to the grates, so the floodwaters could go into that pipe in underneath the building. The grates and the pipes would connect to the other side of the building, so it could allow for essentially passage in both directions of floodwaters, as well as to enhance the ability of the land to absorb those floodwaters, which we believe is in keeping and meeting the performance standards for land subject to coastal storm flowage. And I hope that addresses the concerns that were outstanding. And what's in front of you right now on the screen is the just an example of the grate. It would be essentially a bronze 4x4 type of a grate. And we had discussed at the last meeting concerns we had with, if the building, which has a floor system that is not very high above the existing grade and allowed full flow of any other, all floodwaters under there, that you could have flotsam and other deleterious materials that could get stuck under there and it could get mucky. So we're hopeful that, the grates in the system we've come up with meets those concerns. And I'd be happy to address questions that you may have.
Thank you, Art. Joe?
Through you, Madam Chair. Art, thank you. That detail is exactly what I was hoping for, something along those lines. So thank you for, sharpening a pencil and coming up with a creative solution. So thank you.
Sure thing.
Yes. Any other comments or any questions from commissioners? Looks like no. I have to echo what Joe said. I was really happy to look in our packet and see that you guys were able to work with this site a little bit more. So I definitely appreciate that.
Sure thing. I think the process worked.
Yeah. Jeff, do we have any public comment on this one?
Nope, and you have all of the required information.
Perfect. Art, would you like to close?
Yes, please.
Is there a motion to close? Motion made by Mark, seconded by Joe. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Right, that carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that moves us on. Yes, thank you. That moves us on to MLR3 LLC at 45 Shakamo Road. And this is represented by We have Brian Madden and John Bracken.
Yep, Brian Madden and Ryan Maxwell from Bracken Engineering. Thank you very much. Based on some of the comments that we got at the last meeting, I just want to review some of the information that we've collected to date. And just to reiterate, the proposed project is for a driveway to a single family lot through the Shakamo Road private right of way and through an easement across 8 Wings Fred. The proposed widening from an 8 to 9 foot wide track to an even 10 feet wide, with all that 1 to 2 foot expansion being on the south side away from the resource areas. There's no proposed work north of the existing traveled way, so any of the vegetation along that stretch will not be cut. There may be some limbing necessary for clearance purposes, but there will be no removal of vegetation along that front. And so there was some conversations or questions about the width of the roadway as it approaches 30 Shakamo Road, which is the last driveway that spurs off to the north. And that area was measured leading up to it. Certainly widens at that entrance, but a little bit off of it. Uniform width is nearly 10 feet across. So the intent is just to mimic that continuation of that. And we had reached out to the fire chief to get the opinion on the requirements for fire access. And I did forward an email that we just got yesterday, but they are viewing this as a single family driveway access. And the minimum standards for that is 10 feet minimum width to up to 15 feet. So 10 to 15. And again, we are proposing the absolute minimum for emergency access requirements. That's state fire code, I think local fire code as well. And there's also questions about the future potential development footprint of the site. We provided that as well. And that has been approved by Natural Heritage. Again, this isn't formally proposed or architecturally developed yet. This is just concept plan of what build out could look like. And it shows the 6.7 acre conservation restriction that's proposed on the 10 acre lot. And then the proposed development footprint being under 2 acres with a guest house and main house. And the majority of that work is all outside the 100-foot buffer zone, excluding the driveway entrance. There's a potential for a small area for the driveway regrading to extend into the 100-foot buffer zone to the IVW, but again, that hasn't been fully developed just yet. And I guess with that, I'll turn it over to questions.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks.
Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Brian, for providing additional detail. This question is for Jeff, but it relates to our waiver process. Does a, I guess, statutory requirement of access for emergency personnel, is that sufficient to overcome the regulations that we have in place? Like, is that information enough suitable for a waiver, or do we need any more information from the applicant? I certainly appreciate them contacting the department and getting that information.
Sure. So the applicant in this case did, in the initial application, provide a waiver request that they were justifying the work under what they were proposing, provision A, which is the no adverse impact, no reasonable alternative. And then they were also suggesting it under B, which is that the work proposed is separated from the resource area by an area out of their control, or which is typically like a roadway or part of a traveled way. where the resource area is on the other side of that, so they don't necessarily have control over the buffer zone area on the opposite side. Had requested that. I think from the last time, the question had come up as to the justifying the necessity for the width, not necessarily overcoming the wetland regulations, because you guys could have granted the waiver from what was submitted, but was if you're going to consider or grant that waiver, why that 10-foot was necessary above what was already there. I think that was the information that they were providing back from the public safety officials to help kind of round out that waiver request a little bit more.
Thank you, Jeff. Ian?
Well, so I took Seth's question as to be, what is the legal framework of whether to develop something, develop an area that the developers have the right to overturn the regulations, because that's in a sense what is happening here. And that's the way I took Seth's question, which I thought was an interesting one. And if I misunderstood you, Seth, then I'm posing it myself. And of course, it's not for me to request the fire department to get a smaller vehicle, but there we go. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ian. So we'll go to Seth and then Mark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you did not misunderstand me, Ian. That's what I meant, but I was trying to choose my words carefully. I think that, the waiver under Section B is not one we typically work with, or I don't have a lot of experience working with that. I don't really see the waiver under Section A being fulfilled in this case. I think that, maybe there has been some discussion of no reasonable alternatives, but I don't think that no adverse impacts has been met. But I think that there's maybe more of a case for waiver under requirement B, where it's, refers to areas that are within traveled ways, or I think it specifically says roadways and things like that in the waiver requirement. So there might be a case there. I don't see this as not having an adverse impact, though. I think there will definitely be impacts when you're going to be doing road widening and brush cutting within the 25-foot buffer zone to that resource area.
Thank you, Seth. Mark?
I have a question for Brian, Madam Chair, and that is, what is the statutory requirement the fire department is referring to that demands or requires 10-foot access? Is it a town bylaw? Is it state law? What is that requirement? Where is it?
Yes. So the fire chief, Chief Murphy, had quoted, it's Massachusetts Fire Code 527 CMR 18. And also, I think he also cited town code as well, 139.20.1 B2F. That talks about the minimum requirements for the width of the traveled surface from 10 feet to 15 feet, a max of 15 feet.
Thank you, Brian.
And he provided a link to the local codes.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we got that email today, I think. So it's in your emails. Any other comments? Seth?
Sorry, I just looked back into the exact language of our waiver and requirements, and I think it may be helpful here to just read out Section B, which says the commission may grant a waiver from these regulations when portions of the buffer zone between the proposed project and the adjacent resource area are previously altered and not within the control of the project owner / applicant, such as public or semi-public pedestrian and vehicular access ways. So I think that maybe applies there. The one concern I have is that the road width itself is previously altered, but the area where they're asking to do additional widening is not altered. So some more discussion on that is potentially worth looking into.
Thank you.
And if I may, Madam Chair. Yeah, so certainly there's a little bit of work within the 25 foot that has some existing vegetation. But again, that's separated from the resource area by the traveled way. And I think in that original order of conditions that was issued for the minimal pruning along the traveled way, it noted that the existing historic and developed nature of the traveled way being a factor in the issuance of that waiver request. So I see some parallels of how this would apply. Certainly in an ideal world, we'd love to avoid any alteration of vegetation, but necessity for the future developer of the property. Again, they have a small child, and emergency access is very important to have that available. There are no alternative means of accessing this property. And again, this is a single driveway access. This is not intended to be a cut through road to connect up to Rabbit Run Road. You know, beyond the property gets very tight, grades start to increase, and there's a lot more, there's a grove of cedars up that way that I think folks who've been up that way can vouch can't get a vehicle currently through that area. The southerly portion of the site and the westerly portion of the site are all going to be proposed under conservation restriction. Again, that's 6.7 acres out of the 10 acre parcel. So it's kind of combined package. There, while we're not proposing or have the ability to do any revegetation here, you know, I do see the CR as a benefit to the surrounding area. Certainly that prohibits any future potential development out here.
Thank you, Brian. I know, you know, this got me thinking a little bit more about the road and the proximity to the wetland and just this sort of situation in general on Nantucket. And I guess I'll bring it up again in commissioner's comments, but I almost think we need to be looking at these roads and thinking about actually moving them, especially when we're developing new property, you know, that were previously undeveloped. You know, if we're asking, I guess, for greater access on these roads, they probably need to be moved away from wetlands. And I know that might be, or might involve takings from property owners, but, you know, I just worry that this sort of situation can happen in multiple locations, and it's maybe something we need to look into a little bit further. Mark had his hand up, and then Ian, I'll go to you.
Yes, through the chair, Madam. Brian, is there, you mentioned the owner has a small child. I think that's an important criteria for our decision-making process, but is there anything right now to prevent you from building a single family dwelling on this property? I believe the requirement you're talking about is for a second dwelling requirement. Am I correct in that assumption?
Not necessarily. We did reach out to the planning staff previously about what the expectations or the requirements were if there were to be a pursuit of a secondary dwelling application. In the past, that had been 12 feet. But given the limitations of the site conditions and the resource area proximity, planning director did feel that what we were proposing would be appropriate. But you didn't answer
my question, Brian. Can you build a single family dwelling there right now without any waiver from us?
It would be in violation of the state fire code and the local town code.
So it looks like no.
They wouldn't want to build without proper emergency access. And just to reiterate, I think I mentioned this in the past, but Again, while this is going to be a cut through, and this is really only accessing one lot, there is no potential for future, access off of this roadway. This is the last lot. All the other lots have been developed and or are under conservation restriction here, or conservation land. So this is it. And again, the intent here is to minimize the disturbance to the greatest extent feasible, given the conditions.
Thank you, Brian. Ian?
So thank you, Madam Chair, and this has no real bearing on your client specifically, Brian, but when you look at the plot plan, it's a classic example of shoehorning in a building. And so I put it to my fellow commissioners that, if we deny this, then if they want to take it to court and say it's an unreasonable taking, let the courts decide whether or not our regulations, are worth defending. Future conservation commissions are going to face this more and more and more. So at what point do we draw the line? And, if they can approach the other lot owners and ask for access to have an alternative access, maybe that's a possibility.
Thank you, Ian. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this was raised at the last meeting, and other commissioners have sort of brought this to the table as well, but it's my understanding that the access way right now, it's not a public road, it's a private road. Is that correct?
Yeah, it extends from Shakamo Road, which is further to the east, is a private right of way, and then it goes to a 30-foot wide easement across 8 wing spread, and that continues across onto the property, 45 Shakamo. Again, it's a 30-foot wide easement, and all they're looking for is 10 feet wide, and just to have that even consistent width per state and local fire code.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. And I am looking sort of just at the aerial view. I see there's other houses to the east of the property, but within the easement or within any of the agreements that have been made with abutters, is there any possibility to just slightly relocate the footprint of the traveled way so it would be farther south? I'm certainly not saying that we shouldn't have emergency access to the area. That's not my point here at all. My point is that I'm just trying to see if there are any creative ways to get that same width that you need outside of that 25-foot buffer. So if there's any way to look at that or think about that, I would appreciate it. And if not, that is certainly fine as well. I just wonder if that had been considered.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. I'm zooming in a little bit here. I'm looking at the easement where it extends across 25, extends across 8 wing spread. It nearly follows that 25-foot buffer. So with staying within the easement, there wouldn't be an opportunity. If it's the desire of the commission, we can ask that property owner if that easement could be modified. But one of the things working against us here is the slope really starts to chase uphill there. And I think in order to have a roadway, you'd be doing a lot more disturbance and excavation within that buffer zone to have a traveled way. Right now it sits at a flat And, with the minimal 1 to 2 foot expansion is only, minimal regrading. If we do move it more landward, I think it's going to start to jump up a little bit, or quite considerably, actually.
Thank you, Brian. Joe?
To Seth's point, Seth, I was thinking the same thing, and then I went to the GIS maps, and I know that's not shown on Bracken's plan, but you can see 2 of the structures, they're way on the far end closest to the Shakamo Road. Because I was thinking the same thing, and it's a pool, so it's like, do we grant them 1.5 foot or 1 foot 3 inches to widen the road, or do we carve out a new road and go around? I'm not sure which is the lesser of 2 evils. I kind of feel like the 1 foot 3 removal of some vegetation and widening the road is probably less. And I don't know if there could be some, berming or anything to keep any water from going into that wetland if we're concerned about, oil or passing. But I just think there's really not a lot of solutions to this, because the grade going up, and then as you go by, then it pinches back in, you're squeezing in between 2 25-foot buffers. And it's like, that was when I first looked at this plan, that's the first thing I looked at. It's like, how can we change and alter this road so we're not doing this? But I just don't see much of a better solution. I don't know, maybe someone else could come up with something, but I kind of see what Brian is saying, and I kind of had these first impressions reviewing this when I was first reviewing this application. So I'm not really quite sure what we can do, other than just saying, can we just allow 1 foot 3 inch widening of this road for the least amount of disturbance? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, just to jump in. So right now there is a little bit of a berm lip on that north side with the track being a little bit lower. The intent is to make sure that lip still is maintained, to keep that little separation, contain any runoff within the traveled way, and let it infiltrate.
Yeah, and I thought I saw that when I was biking by there last weekend. So yeah, thank you.
Seth, and then Ian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Joe, I do agree with most of what you've said. I was looking at the aerial imagery, and there is a significant constraint due to the proximity of those easterly abutters to the road. I just want the applicant to do their due diligence, talk to those abutters, maybe take one last look at any other creative opportunities, and then come back to the table. If the next meeting we're at the same alternative as we are now, so be it. But I would just request that they look one more time at creative options and then come back.
Yeah, Seth, and I applaud you for that, always having that perspective. Can we look at it? And I do the same thing when I get the plan. I'm like, could this be done any differently? Not to change or alter any of its designs, but just kind of look at what alternatives do we have. So yeah, I didn't come up with much. So I agree with the way you come at it and the way you make this request. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Ian?
No, I rest my case. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's been covered.
Thank you, Ian.
And we could certainly reach out to those abutters to see if there's any flexibility there.
Thank you, Brian. That would be great. And that kind of speaks to what I was thinking about earlier with, moving roads a little further from wetlands. So that would definitely be appreciated. Jeff, do we have any comments or questions from the public? Mark, I'll go to you first, and then Jeff can do public.
I think, with all due respect to Brian, we need a second opinion on the whole legal lot issue. The planning board granted a subdivision at some point, and they don't grant subdivisions with improper access. I'm fairly convinced he can build a dwelling there. It's the second dwelling that we're hanging up on. So I think he has the perfect right to build a house there right now with perfectly satisfactory access without widening the road a bit. And I think I was going to urge the commission to continue to get an opinion about that if we were going to close tonight, but apparently we're not. So I think I would still like to get an opinion about if that's a legal lot or not. If it's an illegal lot without the proper access, then he's got a real problem. But I think it's a perfectly legal lot for one house. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mark. I know that the fire chief made it seem like they needed a wider access, but we can look more into the actual lot and what that entails. Jeff, do we have public comment?
Yes, we just had a couple questions for RJ. We had a little packet mix up, and this was included in the last packet and wasn't posted correctly in this one. So that's our error. And then with the fire chief's letter just coming in today, I forwarded him a copy because he had asked to see that, and he's just asked for if the applicant would be willing to continue so everyone could have ample time to review all of those materials. And it sounds like we have questions anyway, so.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. Joe?
Thank you. To jump on Mark's comment, I'm wondering if the planning board approval of the subdivision, if we could get that site plan and maybe show that the road was wider, or they must have approved it based on that. So I think any information that more information we get would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Joe. Any other, Seth?
Yeah, I would like to see that too. I mean, if it was originally a 10-foot road and it's just shrunken over time due to coastal processes and change that happens on Nantucket, then now we're talking more like a maintenance project than a waiver. So I think that if that's available, that would be really helpful for sure.
Thank you, Seth. Any other final questions for Brian? Joe?
Actually, to Ryan. Ryan, can you bring in an easy application next time?
All right. So it looks like you guys have your work cut out for you. Would you like to continue until the May 6th meeting?
Please.
Okay. So this will continue until May 6th.
All right. And thank everyone for the thoughtful comments. We do appreciate them.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
And Ryan, you've got to stop making Don have you sit on all these tough ones.
I don't know what he's doing to me. Throwing me into the fire.
Right. All right. So this moves us on to one of the more difficult names we've ever had, but 04 TST 36 Washing Pond LLC at 36 Washing Pond Road, represented by Art Gasparo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I can tell you, I didn't dare fill out an application without triple checking that. I'm before you tonight with a notice of intent for essentially landscaping within the 100-foot buffer zone to the top of the coastal bank. Property at 36 Washing Pond, I believe that the commission is all familiar with. This was a lot that was subdivided out of 34 Washing Pond, and shown on the plan in front of you is the top of the coastal bank, and with the shown in blue, and the 25, 50, and 100-foot buffer zones shown in red. Shown in green is the limit of work and the proposed silt fence, which is outside of the 25-foot buffer zone. And then there is also an area with a dash line with the label in green going to the north, which signifies the priority and estimated habitat mapping by natural heritage. The development of this lot has kept essentially all of the residential structures outside of the 100-foot buffer zone. However, and we wanted to show you essentially everything that is proposed on the lot, even outside of your jurisdiction. And the work that is proposed within your jurisdiction is grading, landscaping, and some hardscaping, which includes a stone fire pit and a sitting type wall, and like I say, grading and plantings. There's the plan that's before you, and then we also filed a supplemental landscape plan. Also proposed is a elevated boardwalk, which would lead from the structures through the buffer zone to the existing set of stairs to access the beach. We did request a waiver, and I think there should be properly some discussion about this walkway as a structural element. There are details on the landscape plan. We feel that the walkway would serve a long-term net benefit by allowing both vegetation to grow. Thank you, Joe. Underneath it, if we go back to the left on the drawing for you, so there's your boardwalk, and essentially confine the pedestrian activity to, instead of just having a regular path, if you will, where folks and activity may stray from that path, they'd be more inclined to stay on that boardwalk. It's also in keeping with the regulations. While this is not through a dune area, the regulations do require that when you have walkways that you, through resource areas, you create them to be elevated so as to prevent adverse impact on the vegetation. So we feel that we're meeting a higher standard essentially by doing that in the buffer zone. And we'd be happy to address questions or concerns that you may have with the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Art. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions related to the boardwalk. First, I'm wondering why that boardwalk wouldn't be considered water dependent if it's essentially providing access to the beach and down to the water. And also, you talked about in the waiver request, wanting to have the elevated boardwalk instead of a path so that people weren't straying from the path and causing additional disturbance. Have we seen those types of impacts already occurring on site? Like, is there a traveled path and has there been disruption? And if so, I would hope that any areas that have been compacted or disturbed could be mitigated and revegetated when the elevated boardwalk goes in.
Art?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with you in terms of a water dependent use, though my understanding and recollection of past practice has been that the commission typically didn't extend their consideration of walkways or platforms or anything like that beyond the actual set of stairs to access the beach to be considered water dependent. So that's why I instead asked for the waiver instead of going down, no pun intended, that path for that. So I would leave that up to your discretion and discussion. I could see it that way myself, but I don't believe that's been the way it's been looked at just as a matter of practice. So we thought instead it would be better to justify why the elevated boardwalk at a minimum size to access those stairs, which in of themselves are water dependent, would be a better way to go. In terms of the current path, the site, the house that was removed from the lot was closer to the bank, and so the existing path doesn't really exist anymore through that area. There's a restoration that has been done that was permitted under the order of conditions for the removal of that structure. There's been there's an order which overlaps what's currently now 34 and 36. And there's been, according to the owner, I think he's told me they've so far planted 20,000 beach grass plugs in that area, and he has another 10,000 coming as part of that restoration. I was up there about 2 weeks ago. It looks great. And so that's, all in the works. And essentially there would be just a new path to go to this. The path in terms of impacts from historical use, whether folks strayed or not, I can't really speak to that other than to say that it was much shorter. There used to be a brick patio that was, I don't want to guess a number, maybe 20 feet or something like that back. And now again, all the structures on both lots have been moved outside of the 50, so it would be a longer path.
Thank you, Art. Seth?
Yeah, thank you, Art, for those clarifications. And I have some additional follow-up related to that. So has the possibility of, having a path that was not a boardwalk go up into, part of the resource area or the buffer zone, and then connecting to that staircase that was just delineated somehow, like with roping or vegetation, instead of doing that boardwalk? I understand the idea of wanting the boardwalk to constrain traffic, but are there other ways to do the same thing on that site?
Art, do you have a response?
I would say there is, but now you're not going to have vegetation that is going to grow underneath that. And so to the regulations, which currently, state that the best way to cross an actual resource area is with an elevated type of a walkway, it would seem to me that it would be preferable to actually have that so that you're not on the sand itself the way you are with the path. So that was why, in considering those sort of two alternatives, I mean, this clearly is also, this is desired by the owners to have this, but I could also see where having it up off of the ground where you're no longer making that kind of compaction, as you noted. Not only does it the matter of containing the pedestrian activity, but it's also minimizing impact, if you will, on vegetation, which wouldn't grow at grade walking path.
Thank you, Art. Seth?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Art. I definitely see both sides here. I mean, I see the desire to have the vegetation being maintained under a boardwalk. I see that as a benefit. The one thing that I'm just a little hesitant about is I don't think we've ever extended kind of the practice you're talking about of requiring boardwalk in a resource area to the buffer zone. We're talking about a pretty major change in how we think about permitting projects. So I'm just a little bit hesitant about how the impacts of the installation of that boardwalk itself would compare to the impacts of people walking. So maybe I just need to think about that more, but I definitely see pros and cons from each perspective.
Thank you, Seth, for making those points. I agree with you, especially the question about why they can't just have like markers with roping to contain pedestrian traffic. I see this as, structural within the 50, and I think it'll open up more structures like this within the 50 for us. Art, is this going to be like the homeowner staying there, or is this going to be a rental?
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is because if it's the homeowners, they should easily be able to stay within, markings and not be walking off the path. I think rental houses have a little bit more, difficulty maybe, but, my feeling is they should not require a boardwalk here. And I'm also questioning some of the jogs in the boardwalk, because that kind of adds extra structure, and why this isn't a straight path to those beach stairs.
I would have to check with the designer and get back to you on that. We will, if I may, Madam Chair, also be continuing because of natural heritage.
Okay, thank you. Joe and then Ian.
I agree with what you and Seth have said about the structure, the boardwalk, and also the jogs. I kind of really had a problem with it. I thought that was really adding a lot, but I was trying to think of a project that we recently have done, and what comes, the only one I can cover right now is 141 Cliff Road, and that had a grass path, and it was, like you said, Ashley, everyone knew where to go. They went to the boardwalk, and which not the boardwalk, but the path, which then led them down to the stairway down to the beach. So I kind of, instead of seeing a 3-foot wide boardwalk that's whatever 60 feet long, just seeing a footpath that's 16, 18 inches wide, I think makes a little more sense, a little more natural, less impact of wildlife, etc. So that's kind of my preference. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Ian, you had your hand up.
Well, Madam Chair, I mean, I'm reiterating what everybody else is saying. It's my preference. I see why it's been chosen. Perhaps I'm mistaken, but to sort of go with the general formal landscaping rather than leaving it in its natural state. And I would urge them to reconsider the boardwalk. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ian. Any other comments or questions from commissioners? Looks like no. Jeff, do we have any comments or questions from the public?
Yes, I'll try to get it right because there was a correction here. But the Nantucket Land Council commented that they have serious concerns about the future implications of approving this private boardwalk. We do not believe the burden of proof has been met to meet the waiver request for this structure. This is not a heavily traveled public access point, and we do not believe that the foot traffic will be of such high volume that it would do more harm to the resource area than a boardwalk through this area.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, so if there are no other questions or comments from commissioners, Art, you said you need to continue. So would
Yes,
you
please.
like to continue until May 6th?
Yes, please.
Okay, so this will continue until May 6th.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that moves us on to Carver Jr. and Delaney at 4 Old Quidnet Milk Route, represented by Mark Ritz.
Good evening, Mark Ritz representing the applicants at 4 Old Quidnet Milk Route, and also the following one at 41 Wawinett Road. These two projects are actually, they're under the same ownership despite the different trust and LLC names. And if it pleases the commission, I'd like to present them together because work spans both lots, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine.
The bulk of the project is occurring on 41 Wawinett Road. We have a number of on-site and off-site wetlands that cast buffer zones all over the property. What we're proposing on 41 Wawinett Road is a redevelopment of an existing residentially developed property, a new main house, a pool cabana, and some modifications to an existing garage/secondary. Just in terms of work that is within jurisdiction, portions of the proposed main house will be inside the 100-foot buffer. The proposed pool will be almost entirely outside of the 100-foot buffer. There will be a patio, a deck, and a pool cabana that are inside the 100-foot buffer. We're also proposing some grading inside the 100-foot buffer and landscaping. Landscaping extends partially into the 50-foot buffer, as well as a small amount of grading to the northwest of the main house. There are no structures inside the 50-foot buffer. One other item on the southwest corner of the property inside the 100-foot buffer to an off-site wetland, the applicant is proposing a solar array. And just to let everybody know, this particular solar array, this is an off-grid system proposed, so they're going to have storage batteries and whatnot. So they will obviously be connected to the grid for backup, but they're proposing to do essentially an off-grid solar installation for to service this property. And that is just partially within the 100-foot buffer to a wetland located on the other side of Old Quidnet Milk. The portion of the project that straddles the internal property line and goes on to the Old Quidnet Milk Route property is the driveway. They are proposing to essentially abandon the existing driveway on 41 Quidnet. They will keep it as an open area to allow for maintenance vehicles to get in to service the solar array and whatnot. But they're proposing to use a shared driveway with the 4 Old Quidnet Milk Route property. And to do so, they are proposing to expand the existing driveway off of the western side of it to provide a turnaround and access to the 41 Wawinit Road property. All of the proposed driveway work has been shoehorned in to be outside of the 25-foot buffer to a wetland on 4 Old Quidnet Milk. It's going to be a pervious driveway, either shell or gravel. And that basically summarizes the bulk of the project. We have provided a grading cross section to show the commissioners what we're proposing for grading. The bulk of the grading is happening outside of the 50-foot buffer. And, you know, we're really trying to sort of minimize grading and landscaping within the 50-foot. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Ian?
So I'd like to thank Mark for adding those details or having those details added to the plan, because I think that's helpful. And I think shoehorn is the appropriate description. And I have nothing further to add. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Any other comments or questions from commissioners? Looks like no. Jeff, do we have any comments or questions from the public?
No, you do not.
Do we have everything we would need to close these two?
Unfortunately, we are still waiting for natural heritage.
Okay. So Mark, would you like to continue then for 2 weeks?
Yes, I'd like to continue to the next meeting and hopefully we'll have heritage squared away by then.
Okay, so that will continue until May 6th.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that moves us on to Peter and Caitlin DuPont at 47 Millbrook Road, Lot 1, represented by Mark Ritz.
It's actually
these are both Brian Madden. Sorry about that.
Okay, sorry, Brian.
no problem. Thank you very much. Brian Madden from LEC for the record, representing the DuPonts. The proposed project involves construction of a single-family dwelling. There's a bordering vegetated wetland within the southerly portion of the site. This property is at the corner of Millbrook and Burnt Swamp Lane. I think everyone's familiar with that funky intersection. So there is a new proposed driveway entrance off Millbrook that's outside the 25-foot buffer zone. The proposed house itself is outside the 50-foot buffer zone. The bottom of that foundation is going to be set above high groundwater, but we will be within that 2-foot separation. So we have requested a waiver for that. But the project is essentially straightforward. Again, the driveway coming off the existing or off Millbrook will meet up with the existing driveway. There'll be a well, water utility line accessing the house, septic, force main line out to far eastern portion of the site. There will be an IA, that will be an IA system. And with that, I'll turn it over to questions.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Looks like no. Jeff, do we have any questions or comments from the public on this one? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Earlier in the meeting, Mr. Daniel Gallagher had a couple questions about what type of septic systems were being proposed. So just to recap for that, it wasn't totally clearly marked, so I'm glad Brian clarified that it's an IA system on this lot. And then he continued by saying it was his understanding that if the system was within 100 feet of the wetlands, an advanced system capable of removing nutrients from the wastewater was required. I was ordered to replace our system as an abutter. And then I might add that I'm an abutter, or I'm a neighbor, and my property line includes nearly half of the pond. I'm concerned about the nutrient load to the pond. We were the first I know of to install an IA septic system.
Thank you, Jeff. Brian?
Yep. Yeah, IA system. It is outside the 100-foot buffer zone. If you have any more specific questions, I'm sure Ryan would be happy to answer those.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioners haven't really been curious about this one. Looks like no. Jeff, do we have everything we need to close?
Yes, you have all the required information for this one.
Okay, Brian, would you like to close?
Please.
Is there a motion to close? Motion made by Dave. Is there a second? Seconded by Joe. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Right, that carries unanimously. And that moves us on to James G. and Sarah R. Tyler at 47 Millbrook Road, Lot 2, also represented by Brian Madden and Ryan Maxwell.
Thank you very much. Brian Madden for the record, representing the Tylers. Basically, this is just to install a new IA septic system with the work being proposed next door. These are daughter, son-in-law. These are the parents. The only minimal activity within the 100-foot buffer zone is a portion of the septic tank minimally encroaches into the 100-foot. And with the new septic layouts, it required the well to be relocated, and that's up along Millbrook, and the water line will follow the existing driveway across to the house. And that's basically it. No waivers proposed on this one.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Looks like no. Jeff, does the public have any comments about Lot 2?
I would say that the same comments probably still apply, but I think Brian has answered those questions.
Okay, perfect. So Brian, would you like to close?
Please.
Is there a motion to close? Motion made by Mark, seconded by Joe. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Right, that carries unanimously. And that moves us on to Randolph G. Sharp Jr. Trust at 49A Meadowview Drive, represented by Brian Madden and Ryan Maxwell.
Thank you very much. Brian Madden for the record. Proposed project involves the construction of a single-family dwelling and appurtenances. The resource areas on or abutting the parcel are BVW within the northwest of the proposed limit of work, and a BVW in the eastern portion of the site that extends off-site. To the south, this is a small pond that abuts Meadowview Drive. The proposed structures are all outside the 50-foot buffer zone. No new work in the 25-foot, and the project is maintaining the 50%, no greater than 50% alteration between the 25 and 50 foot. They have requested a waiver for the separation of high groundwater for the proposed house and pool. It's a 16 by 32 foot pool with a dry laid stone patio surrounding it with an auto cover. On the site plan, you can see the proposed subsurface infiltration systems that are designed to collect runoff from both the pool patio area and the house itself. And so for the driveway coming in off of Meadowview, we are proposing to relocate that. There is a former driveway in that location that currently extended into the 25-foot buffer zone. And we're proposing to relocate that outside the 25-foot and revegetate the stippled crosshatched area, restoring the entire 25-foot buffer zone. Proposed species being high bush blueberry and arrowwood. Certainly we can augment that at the commission's direction. There are a couple like lone autumn olive and bush honeysuckle shrubs that will also be cut and removed from the restoration area. And again, as proposed, we are requesting that waiver for that work for an improvement over existing. And I'll turn over to questions.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Looks like no. Oh, Ian?
I mean, we've dug our heels in about the 2-foot groundwater when it comes to pools and, plus the house. What are they? I mean, it seems like with respect, Brian, it seems like an unending battle to try and enforce what we've done previously. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ian.
If requested, we can certainly provide a little bit more information on that front. We haven't, I don't believe that there's been any soils test borings directly in these locations, but based on some past soil testing in the area, it is highly variable, and it's not the groundwater that's encountered. It's not actual groundwater. It seems to go to a clean sand below, and then you hit the actual groundwater. But certainly we can provide some more information on that front and in order to justify the no adverse impact statement.
And if I may, Madam Chair, do you know which direction the groundwater flow is?
I do not, but we can certainly provide that.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Ian, for your questions. Seth, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Brian, for being willing to provide that additional information. I know in the notice of intent it said that soils and groundwater information will be forthcoming, so more information on that front would be great. And I know, especially in sites where there's a lot of redoxomorphic features, it's highly variable. So doing more than one borehole, doing a series of them in the general vicinity would be helpful there. And I totally agree with Ian. I think that the requirement to maintain the 2-foot separation to high groundwater can potentially be overcome in situations of structures that are living structures like dwellings, but with pools, I think there is evidenced ways, even evidence in submissions that you've brought to the commission for other applicants to do shallower pools or to do these removable fiberglass pools or things like that that could be considered when we're dealing with high water tables. So looking at that could be helpful as well.
Yep, we can certainly provide some more information on that front. And just as a case of comparison, the abutting house at 4 Wama Squid, or is it 1 Wama Squid? At the corner of Wama Squid and Meadowview, it does have a full basement foundation, and they don't have any issues with water in that reportedly. So
Thank you, Brian.
they speak to the variability of this area. So
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Looks like no. Jeff, do we have any questions or comments from the public?
No, you do not.
Well, I definitely appreciate Ian and Seth's comments. And Brian, it looks like you'll need some more time to get some questions answered.
yes, if we could request a continuance at least to May 6th, please.
Okay. So then this will continue until May 6th. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so that moves us on to requests for determination. We have Cummings at 36 Crooked Lane, represented by Art Gasparo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before you tonight for this property that I believe you're all familiar with, where we have a border and vegetated wetland as well as an isolated vegetated wetland. The buffer zones are shown in red, the 25, 50, and 100-foot buffer zones. The driveway goes up between the two resource areas. And shown in green is the proposed project, which is essentially to construct 2 fenced gardens within an existing lawn area. We've adjusted the fencing around the gardens so that it doesn't encroach into the 50-foot buffer zone, and therefore no waivers are required for the project, we believe. And I think it's fairly straightforward, but happy to address questions or concerns that you may have.
Thank you, Art. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know this is something that we've thought about doing more for notices of intent that have come in, but with any proposed gardening projects, I think we need to condition them to require soil testing and limit fertilizer and agricultural chemical use based on those tests. So just hoping that when this is put forward, we could include those conditions within the RDA.
Thank you, Seth. Jeff, are we able to add that to the RDA?
Yes, you do have the ability to do some limited conditioning through RDAs.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Ian?
Yes, I'd like to thank Art's clients for coming forwards on this because, yeah, otherwise I think it probably would have gone under the radar. So thank you, Art. Please.
I'll pass that along.
Thanks to them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't even think of that, but that's totally true. So I appreciate them doing the right thing and getting their permits. So Jeff, what would staff recommend on this one?
So I would recommend that -3 with the condition that soil tests be done in the garden area prior to any use of fertilizer or other agricultural chemicals, and that any fertilizer in compliance with the Nantucket BMP that's in our regulations.
Thank you, Jeff. Would somebody like to make that motion to issue a -3 with the fertilizer and soil testing condition?
So moved.
And it looks like seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Right, that carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, Art. And that moves us on to the Braze LLC at 23 Baxter Road, represented by Brian Madden and Ryan Maxwell.
Oh, nope, that was me.
Oh, sorry, represented by.
That's okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm before you tonight just for a resource area delineation. And so we're on the east side of Baxter Road. And while there is a a bank, an elevated landform, we may say. The regulated resource area is a coastal dune, which does not reach the bottom of that bank. And we've shown, we flagged it and shown that as a blue line on the plan. And we also showed the 100-foot buffer zone, which essentially extends to where the top of that bank is. And this is consistent with other orders that have been granted and the delineation determined in this area.
Thank you, Art. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Looks like no. Jeff, what would staff recommend for this one?
Yeah, so we did do an inspection and kind of looked at the soils there and some of the vegetation and parent material and agree with the delineation and recommend that +2, confirming the resource area boundaries. Sorry, it's +2A, confirming the resource area boundaries.
Thank you, Jeff. Would somebody like to make that motion to issue a +2A?
So moved.
A motion made by Joe. Is there a second? Seconded by Ian. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, that carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that moves us on to minor modifications. We have Luxury Brands Incorporated at 100 Low Beach Road, represented by Brian Madden.
Thank you very much. Brian Madden for the record. So the proposed minor updates include a slight reduction in the size of the pool house and patio area, relocating the driveway area, parking area further to the east. Slight reduction for the pool equipment location. There's some planting details updates, some landscaping updates, steps and pavers. And we also showed some septic connection details that have been approved by the Board of Health. And with that, I will turn over to questions.
Thank you, Brian. Looks like Seth has a question or comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have some concerns about the proposed planting schedule. And I see that, you know, in general, there's a great mix of native plants here, but there's also non-natives and some plants on here that are potentially detrimental that I'd like to see removed, especially, you know, in the areas to the south that are closer to the resource area. I think that, you know, there's no reason to have the America Gale, the southern bayberry, when you could just plant more of the northern bayberry. I know hydrangeas are typical Nantucket planting, but within the buffer zone, I'd prefer not to see those. Same as the flowering dogwood, the magnolia, and the privets, just and also the catmint. Just keeping the areas within the buffer zone limited to the native species would be preferable in my opinion here. And I did look at where each of these things are being proposed, and I think just doing a second look at that and maybe relocating things as necessary and removing some species as necessary would be beneficial for this site.
Thank you, Seth. I always tend to agree with your statements on plant species, so I appreciate that.
And sorry to interject. I'm just looking at everything. Appreciate the comments. I think they try to be native as much as possible, with the privet just up along the property line, and that's partially outside the 100-foot buffer zone. Some of the magnolia, there's only a couple around the parking area. But Seth, so was the primary issue the hydrangeas south of the pool area?
That was my major concern. I get it. People like hydrangeas. They're characteristic of Nantucket as ornamental plantings, but just potentially relocating them to be farther away from the buffer zone or outside the buffer zone would be great. And the same about privet. I know some of it occurs outside the buffer zone, and it's a typical screen planting, but we know there's already one privet on the Massachusetts banned Massachusetts banned plant list. And as time goes on and we learn more, probably that whole genus is going to get on that list at some point. So I think they could use the Eastern red cedars that they're proposing elsewhere on site for the same type of screening. So I just think relooking at that landscape plan a little bit and coming back with some updates could be beneficial.
Yep, we can certainly take that back to them and refine that list and locations.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from commissioners? Looks like no. So Brian, would you like to continue this for 2 weeks?
Please, yes.
Okay, so this will continue until May 6th.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you. And that moves us on to Kristin Engel, trustee at 90 Pacomo Road, represented by Paul Santos.
Thank you on behalf of the applicant, Kristin Engel. The address is 90 Pacomo Road. This is a minor modification in which we are simply incorporating into your file the final landscape plan, which is the final location of a pool and spa that had previously been approved under a notice of intent, had been slightly modified under a prior minor modification. And this is the location that they intend to go with and construct. It is, as I said, a previously approved pool and spa in a location within your jurisdiction that did not require any waivers, be it for a building setback and or groundwater separation. So we're simply incorporating this plan, hopefully as a minor modification, into the project file, and happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Paul. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Looks like no. Jeff, do we have everything we would need to issue the minor mod?
We believe so, yes.
Okay. Is there a motion to issue the minor mod? Motion made by Dave, seconded by Mark. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelberg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, that carries unanimously. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
And that moves us on to certificates of compliance. We have SP Norwell LLC, Lot 5, Mariner Way, and we have this represented by Catherine Barnacle.
Hi, can you guys hear me? I think I'm live.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yes, hi, I'm Katie Barnacle, formerly of AECom, now with ILEX Environmental. And we were before you in January of this year for an amended order of conditions. And if you remember, this one was the house that was built. There was some misunderstanding on our part. We had submitted a revised plan that had not been approved by the commission. And then the house was built, and then we had to do an after the fact amended order. And so the house is built, it's in place. And now we're just asking to wrap up the file and close it out with the certificate of compliance. And so we're requesting a certificate of compliance for lot 5.
Thank you, Katie.
Thanks.
Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Looks like no. Jeff, have you been out to check the site?
Yes, we would agree that it is now in compliance with all of its original permits and that the certificate could be issued.
Thank
Great.
you. Is there a motion to issue the certificate of compliance? Motion made by Dave. Is there a second? Seconded by Joe. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Right, that carries unanimously. Thank you, Katie.
Great. Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night.
If I can figure out how to leave.
You're stuck with us.
Okay, bye.
Bye. All right, so that moves us on to 17 Folger Avenue Realty Trust at 17, 19, and 21 Folger Avenue, represented by Ryan Maxwell.
I think Ryan dropped off, so I can handle this for him. This was for a sewer line installation to service the houses on Folger Ave. The sewer line has been backfilled and the roadway has been restabilized, and the sewer department has signed off on the as-built that it was constructed to their standards and in compliance. So we are also recommending that this be issued in compliance.
Thank you, Jeff. Is there a motion to issue the certificate? Motion made by Ian. Is there a second? Seconded by Joe. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Right, that carries unanimously. And that moves us on to orders of conditions. These were emailed out to us earlier.
So I will apologize. I missed one. I got all out of sorts sending these out today, and I sent a few that were just started that I was just running through the list and having in. So there may be a few that didn't need to be in that are in, and some that are not done, and then some that are done. So sorry, it was a busy day. So
No
kind of a
worries.
hot mess.
We can manage through it.
So, because I've told you this before, I start all of them when they come in, so I don't get swamped like right before the meeting. And today I managed to lump in a few that I didn't intend to. But 86 Quinton Road, this is one that we closed last time. This was one of Don's projects that was a kind of redevelopment where they were removing the existing structure and constructing it farther away. If you guys remember, this is the one that had the septic system that was within the 100-foot buffer zone to the dune, where it was just kind of redoing the septic system in place as well. So just had a kind of condition related to the septic system, going from the conventional to the IA system for the reports from the Board of Health. But other than that, there were no other waivers required with that exception for the leach facility. And it seemed pretty straightforward.
Thank you, Jeff. Does anybody have any comments or additions? And if not, would somebody like to make the motion to approve as drafted? Looks like motion made by Mark. Is there a second? Seconded by Joe. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Right, that carries unanimously. And that moves us on to Town of Nantucket, Cow Pond Lane.
So I sorry, one of the ones I missed, Madam Chair, was the one because I was working on it late. The Conservation Foundation Capon Pond order. I emailed it separately, but I can share my screen if people would prefer to see it there as well.
Would people like to see it on screen, or are you okay pulling it up in your email?
On screen's fine.
Okay, so Jeff, can you pull it up for us?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Can everyone see that now?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Sorry about that. So it's again for the treatment that's there. So we have our typical kind of invasive species treatments that are there. The one that's a little bit more unique to this one, obviously, is providing notice to the commission about any algicide or alum. They're coming in for an annual report in front of the commission to provide it. But the one that's a little bit unique to this one is condition number 20, that the quantity and specific type of any chemical treatment will be reported in writing to the commission on an annual basis. Any chemical treatment shall be applied by a licensed applicator. All water quality data shall be collected pre and post any chemical treatment and provided to the commission for review. Phosphorus sampling is required to be included in this data, since that's what they're essentially trying to handle is phosphorus with the alum treatment to get that kind of pre and post. And I know I had a pretty lengthy phone call, excuse me, not phone call, I had a pretty lengthy Zoom with Mass Natural Heritage about this project, about some of the things that they would normally be including in this. And we kind of ran through the order, and part of that condition is on their suggestion. While it was not necessarily in their jurisdiction to include it in this case, because their species was piping clover, it's something that we talked about at great length. And it was a great conversation. I learned a lot about how they regulate alum and some of these algicide treatments in these areas. And it was nice that they were able to give a little extra review from my end. So that was part of the late changes today, was waiting to hear back from them too. So hopefully that covers everything.
Thank you, Jeff.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Ian?
Yes, thank you. This is through you to Jeff. My understanding was for the condition number 19, that they're using C clear. And,
oh, I apologize. That is my mistake.
Okay, thank you.
I will correct that.
Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Any other additions or comments from commissioners or questions? Looks like no. So is there a motion to approve as amended?
So moved.
Motion made by Ian. Is there a second? Seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, that carries unanimously. And now that moves us on to Town of Nantucket, Cow Pond Lane.
All right, getting caught up. So this was the drainage project that was in front of us for Cow Pond Lane. So I looked at it again because I know we talked a lot about the rain garden. Weirdly enough, the rain garden is not technically within our jurisdiction, but I think it was good for them to hear to make sure to put good species in there. So really the component that we're looking at is the, I hate using the word overflow, but the secondary drainage, that if that detention basin gets full, there's a area for it to go without flooding out the road. We're really looking at it. I couldn't think of really any conditions for it, but that's what I had.
Thank you, Jeff.
So that was one of those where I thought it was a worthwhile like overstep to make sure that they understood the importance of the species there, and they didn't seem to mind. So just kind of let it go.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Any comments or additions from commissioners? And if not, oh, Ian?
Do we want any photographic evidence of before and after, how it progresses, or are we happy with the way it's drawn? I don't want to add to their burden. Would it help in terms of?
Well, we could certainly add a condition 19 that they should provide yearly photographs of the overflow area.
I'd be curious, and I think it'd be helpful going forward to see how it works.
Yeah, I agree. I think that monitoring is important. Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, so we'll just add that the applicant shall provide yearly photographs of the overflow area. the commission to review.
If there aren't any other thoughts, is there a motion to approve as amended? Motion made by Dave. Is there a second? Seconded by Mark. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Right, that carries unanimously. And we did not close Surfside Beach, so that moves us on to Stillwater's nominee trust at 7 Wama Squid Place.
Yes, sorry, my computer is going slow. So.
Move to approve as drafted.
Thanks, Ian.
Is there a second? Seconded by Seth. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur.
Aye.
Aye.
That carries unanimously. And that moves us on to Nantucket Island's Land Bank at Lovers Lane, Clifford Street. Which is, I think, pretty straightforward.
Again, I didn't have a lot of conditions for a lot of these because they seem pretty straightforward for something like this.
I'll move for approval.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
That carries unanimously. And that moves us on to Jill Dean Shepherd at 12 and 14 Midland Avenue. And this was the water connection.
Yeah, this, again, I didn't really have any conditions for this. I mean, it seemed to me like they were gonna cut a trench, put the water line in, backfill it, and then just let it be. So it seemed pretty straightforward too.
If there are no comments or additions from commissioners, is there a motion to approve as drafted?
Motion to approve as drafted.
Is there a second? Seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Right, that carries unanimously. And that brings us to Troja Nominee Trust at 26 Easy Street.
So the one change on this, I know it's certainly not a change, is we've obviously included that new updated plan in detail and some of the reference that's there for the site plan that they sent in. But other than that, I didn't really have a lot of thoughts on.
I think this ended up very well.
Agreed.
Yes, I agree. It's nice to work with applicants who truly want to work with us as well to come out with a common outcome. If there's no additions, Jeff, do we need to approve this as amended if you need to update plans?
No, I already did. So it's all good.
Okay.
Also move.
Second.
So seconded by Joe. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, that carries unanimously. And that moves us on to 47 Millbrook Road, Lot 1, which is Peter and Caitlin Dupont.
All right, this is one I meant to put it in. Like I said, I had a few mistakes today. This is the one where they applied for the 2-foot separation waiver for the house. Going in there and provided the information for that for the non-full foundation.
What a waiver, Greg? Jeff, I couldn't hear you.
The waiver that they requested was a waiver to the 2-foot separation of groundwater for the.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I'm happy to type it on the fly, but I would appreciate more if we just had other conditions and I can add that waiver in.
Okay. Seth,
Yeah, maybe not conditions, but this was the one where there was a member of the public wondering if this was an IA system. So maybe just in the description indicating that this is an IA system for well, this one and the other one, I think. But
Right, so I'll add in there, so it says now installation of a well and installation of an IA septic system.
One. Any other thoughts from commissioners? So would somebody like to make a motion to approve as amended? A motion made by Dave. Is there a second? Seconded
So there
by
is no,
Seth.
so there is no waiver for groundwater separation on this.
There is, Jeff needs to add it in.
And we'll be granting the waiver then?
If we approve this, yes, we would be granting that waiver for the 2-foot separation to groundwater for the structure. So.
We have a discussion, actually, I mean, we talked about this on another project on Wama, Squid or Meadowview. I mean, are we being inconsistent in waiving this or not?
Yeah, I think we can talk about it. I think Seth brought up on the Meadowview property, you know, just the difference between like a structure that you're living in, your house, versus waivering a pool. But yeah, I think we can certainly have a discussion on that.
This is for a dwelling, isn't it?
This is for a dwelling, yes.
But no pool mentioned.
No, so this essentially was one property and the parents are subdividing so that their daughter and son-in-law have a home on Nantucket as well.
All good.
Nice people.
Yeah. Seth?
yeah, I think my concern, and I think it needs to be dealt with in the regulatory update, is the way that waiver requirement is applied to dwellings versus ancillary structures. So things like pools or decks or things like that.
Of course, in today's world, south pools are considered key to any happy homeowner. What's the world coming to?
Yeah.
Anyway, I think there's some merit in the waiver for a dwelling for sure.
Sorry, you do see merit?
I think there is some merit for a dwelling.
Okay. Would you like to have any other further discussion, or is this enough for you?
It's typically been the pools we've had more concern about.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, for the future, actually, I've forgotten this application, but is there a full cellar going in this house? Because that might be a factor. People are building, concrete pads now, heated floors on top of the ground, and no cellar. So if they're close to the groundwater, we could ask them to do that.
Yeah, Jeff was shaking his head no, that there wasn't a
No,
base.
I believe they had just proposed kind of a frost wall and slab or crawl space.
Thank you. Okay. I'm good. Sorry.
No problem. I am forgetting who made the motion though now. So Dave, and then seconded by Seth. Thank you for jogging my memory. So by roll vote, Beal.
Aye.
Engelborg.
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding.
Aye. Was that Mr. LaFleur's finger, or was that his cat's tail wagging? I couldn't tell. Okay.
That's an aye.
An aye for Dave, and then Topham.
Aye.
All right, so that carries unanimously. And that moves us on to James G. and Sarah R. Tyler at 47 Millbrook Road, Lot 2.
So this one doesn't require any waivers. This was just for the installation of the well and the new septic tank.
Motion to issue.
Is
Second.
there? Seconded by Ian. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Sorry, just one additional discussion. Was it updated to include the IA septic tank on this one too?
This one is not going to an IA septic system. This is staying
Okay.
because it's already an existing septic system. They're just replacing the tank.
Okay, aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, that carries unanimously. And that, I believe, is all we closed tonight. So that moves us on to other business, approval of minutes from the April 8th meeting. Thank you, Terry, for the minutes as always. Does anybody have any amendments, or is there a motion to issue as drafted?
Motion to issue is drafted.
Second. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Terry.
Roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Harrison, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Right, that carries unanimously. Reports, Crack.
So we had two meetings on April 13th with Arcadis, the first in the morning, a regular meeting, discussing the coastal resiliency plan. And then in the afternoon, it was specifically a focus group, which included members of the town and select board members and town staff. And I think at some point it's going to be online for people to see. So it was just steady progress going forward on both the town resiliency and the SBPF Baxter Road examination of alternatives.
Thank you, Ian. CPC.
Nothing to report, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. And we don't have NP and EDC tonight. So that brings us to enforcement updates. Town of Nantucket, 79 Baxter Road and Sconset Bluff. And it looks like we have Dwight Dunk, Glenn Wood, and Chad Sumner on for this one.
Yes, I did see Helmut Weimar here as well earlier. I think he's under the Frank Weimar tab. So before Dwight jumps in, just to kind of jog everyone's memory a little bit, we issued out an enforcement action related to some work that had happened down in front of 79 Baxter Road. We had issued that out to SPPF as the listed applicant on it, to the property owner at 79 Baxter Road from previous work, knowing that everyone's been managing that project individually, and then also to the town as the property owner. In this case, the owner of 79 contacted us pretty much immediately and has engaged Dwight and Glenn and has sent them tonight to kind of run through it. The enforcement that we had issued was related to some issues with the order of conditions that's originally from 2007. And then there's a few amendments after that related to not providing us notice that work was going to be occurring and some concerns that work had occurred below the high water line. But I think I'll let Dwight run through kind of what they have found and kind of what steps that they're proposing. And then maybe I'll jump back in after that.
Thank you, Jeff. You want to take it, Dwight?
Yes, can you hear me okay, Madam Chair?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. And I'm not sure if I can share screens. Jeff, Joanne, is it possible to share screen? Okay,
yeah.
Well, I'll get started first and then I'll go to that. As Jeff mentioned, we did have a discussion with Jeff and George. And as Jeff mentioned, we understood the three main topics of the enforcement order was the work potentially occurring below mean high water. And by work, I think we're talking about the track marks of equipment operating on the beach. Number two, that the commission staff was not notified. And three, that's in the enforcement order is the potential for pedestrian access along the beach potentially being impeded by the Coyer Terrace installation. And so talking about those three activities, it's pretty clear that the track lines did occur, do show that the equipment operated below the rack line. But as we know, the rack line is not necessarily the mean high water line. And so what we did was we looked at recent aerial topography that's available from AirShark along the beach, overlaid it with a recent aerial photo. And then, so when we look at that, we see that the mean high water, following my cursor, is at about 3 feet NABD. The limit of the Coyer Terrace is up in here at about elevation 10, and that's about a 50-foot offset. So we acknowledge that there was, equipment operating below the rack line. We can't determine if it occurred below the mean high water, but we know it did occur on the beach. And, as we can see, there are successive rack lines here of the various limits of wave action from previous high tides. Number two, we did talk with the contractor. Dave Lager's company Dave has now joined Sumco. We talked to Sumco, forwarded them the pre-work notification form that the commission has, and talked to them about the need to notify the commission before maintenance activities occur, so that that won't happen again. And lastly, the potential for the Coyer rolls to be impeding pedestrian access along the beach. Number one, this photo, we see that the Coyer installation, as I said, is about 50 feet landward of the mean high water. And what we've also done is compared aerial photos, the current one that we just were looking at 2020, as well as one rectified aerial from 2010. And we can see the lines of the Coyer terracing that were covered by sand at the time. And basically it has remained about 260 feet from the road. We can't use the Weimar's residence because the residence was moved to, was moved landward in the last 10 years. But the Coyer install has not really changed since 2010, and likely not be from where it was prior to 2010. So the access along the beach remains there, except during storms and periods of high surf. And we do have members of Sumco here if you have questions of the contractor. But in terms of trying to resolve the enforcement order, we had talked about potentially 3 conditions to the enforcement order to allow maintenance work to continue as needed on these Coyer installs. One is putting it in there that the contractor shall notify the Conservation Commission staff at least 48 hours before work by submitting the start work notification form. The contractor, when there's need to place sand, the contractor identifies the source of the sand and any other materials that would be put in the Coyer terrace for the maintenance. And also, prior to starting work, that the mean high water would be staked in the field with wooden stakes to make sure that there's no operation of equipment, placement of materials, supplies, etc., seaward of the mean high water mark, and that then those stakes be removed after the work is done. So that's what I have to say in terms of the enforcement order, and the 3 of us are here to answer any questions the commission has. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen for now.
Thank you, Dwight. Ian?
Yes, Madam Chair. So with respect, Dwight, I wonder how we could really resolve this going forward about interference with pedestrian access along the beach at high tide. because I was out there both on December 16th and December 18th last year to see how the geotubes had fed with the storm that had taken place around December 14th through 16th. And I have photographs on my phone for December 18th at 2:55 p.m., which, if memory serves, was after high tide. And it shows absolutely clearly that the water is up to the up, right up. I had to clamber up onto the the
Jute tubes.
well, not onto the geotubes. I'm talking about Helmut's property here, onto the jute. Thank you. To get around. I'm surprised that you feel that it's 50 feet away, and so I wondered perhaps we need photographic evidence going forward so that we can resolve this.
Okay. Well,
thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
If I may respond, Madam Chair.
Yep.
Yeah, just two things with that. Number one, we, chose the oldest aerial photo that we could find that was geo-referenced so that we knew, measurements could be taken with some assurity. And what the Coyer Terrace was, the order of conditions was in effect in 2010. This is where it was authorized to be installed, and it's remained in the place that it was authorized at that time. Number two, the location of the mean high water is not based on a feeling. It's based on the topography of the beach as, surveyed by AirShark and overlaid on the aerial photo. So, we're using the mean high water for this area. Now, the beach, as we know, beaches are dynamic landforms. They can build up during quiet times. They can lower during more active parts of the season, winter beach, summer beach. And also, the mean high is a mean high. So you can have, periods of new moons, full moons and new moons causing it to be higher, other astronomical and weather conditions changing the actual tide on a daily basis. So where I'm going with this is, we've used the survey data that's there to identify the mean high water, and the Coyer terraces have not moved seaward in the last 10 years.
I understand, Dwight, and I just know that I've had to clamber up on them several times. And so I'm thinking that we need to try and resolve this through, third-party photographs at high tide or something would be my my 2 cents worth, but thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a comment related to the mean high water as well. It's not my area of expertise how those are determined, but in the imagery provided, it's clear that the water is going past that line. So I understand what a mean is, but I was just wondering if the staff or any independent reviewer has had a chance to look at that and say that we agree with where the mean high water level is.
Thank you, Seth.
Yeah, what we're seeing here is also wave action, and on an area with wave action, the waves can extend beyond beyond the mean high. I would presume, I'm going to have to say, I have to presume here that the mean high water along Nantucket follows the traditional NOAA definition of following the 19-year cycle that NOAA uses to look at their epochs and determine their mean water elevations, and they change those they update their tide tables, regularly, shouldn't say regularly, but they update them as they close out those cycles and calculate that data. So, we're using the mean high water that's available.
Thank you, Dwight. I know I've had questions about the mean high water before, and just the fact that it's probably not updated frequently enough with sea level rise and all the changes that we're seeing, that they're definitely behind in those important updates. And Dwight, I had a question. The overlay that you showed that did have the mean high water on it, was that a summer beach profile overlay, or was that a winter beach profile?
I would have to check the date of the air shark survey. It was the 2020 air shark survey, so it was probably more of a summertime survey. I believe they did it back in September or so, but I would have to double check the actual date of the survey.
Okay, because I think that's another important issue with passability, is that a lot of the issues are happening in the winter. And I think we do need some way to account for that in our orders of conditions, because there is such a big difference. Joe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Jeff, I thought you said that this site was supposed to have like 5,000 cubic yards annually dumped over. And it seems like the last time any soil was placed on this template was the same contaminated sand as SPPF, where it had, wire, brick, concrete. I think that was a site that Jeff had recognized, but still, I mean, you look at that 2010 photo to the 2020, it's pretty embarrassing that, no one has like really maintained this. And then to go back to Mr. Larga's comment, it's $100 a yard for sand on Nantucket, and we don't want to spend that. And, they came to us for the application. They want to protect their home, but I feel like this project is in total neglect. It's really embarrassing to even look at those photographs. It's upsetting. I mean, personally. And I feel like, the Quinlan Association pointing the finger at the geotubes, I think that this site with no sand and the wave action that is coming off these geotubes is causing, I think, more destruction. SPPF has been dumping sand, and slight on some months or times, storms, but this has been not contributing at all to any of, the littoral system. And quite frankly, this really is upsetting to have this project take so long to come forward. And then, just Mr. Larga's comments, I'm still upset with those. I just found him, quite frankly, flipping us off, if you will. So yeah, I really want to see this get moving forward, but I really don't feel like anyone's taking full responsibility for this being in total neglect. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And this is definitely one of the properties that was roped in that earlier enforcement with the contaminated fill that was, not resolved. Dwight?
But it's only dealt with now.
Madam Chair, just in response, I just want to, we're here because of the enforcement order for this parcel 79 Baxter. So, looking at the owners of 79 Baxter have been placing sand and maintaining the Coyer Terrace on their property. I know Attorney Cohen talked about it, about a year or so ago, that, when the Coyer Terraces went in, then each owner was responsible for maintaining theirs. So for the EO, for this property owner has been doing their share for this reach of beach. And right now I'm not representing any of the other property owners relative to this order. So, with that, the Weimers have been doing a good job on that.
Thank you for that clarification, Dwight. Jeff, I have a question for you about this then. Because these orders are a little bit confusing and older, through this enforcement process, can we have them file a new notice of intent for this specific property with the Weimars listed as the property owner, instead of having SBPF still on that contract ticket?
I think before I answer that, I think the short answer is I would like to double check with George to see if that is the prudent way to go about dealing with that, because that's something that I know we require notices before, but this is one with an open order for the work on the property. I think I want to make sure that that is something that is proper for us to do, but I'm happy to check.
Okay, yeah, I just think any way we can clean up the orders out there to make them less confusing, the better.
I do think with this too, like even in the short term while we're trying to get that answer, I mean, I think the commission does have the ability to, I know Dwight put forward some interim solutions to some of those issues briefly. You do have the ability to issue out kind of a determination through the enforcement order to say those things have to be done. I think also, you know, something that says providing us documentation of meeting your nourishment requirement and what the schedule of that's going to be could also be something that's included in that to kind of round up some of those issues. I know the order, just for me, and since Joe asked a minute ago, the order in its totality does require a 5,000 cubic yard contribution per year. The order, though, is listed from the stretch from essentially from 77 to 99 Baxter and how that breaks out. And it's not 5,000 like per property, it's 5,000 in totality. And I'm not sure that that figure is the best anymore. I think everyone would agree that looking at what these should be is always a good idea. But if you figured it out by the total length of what the initial structure was supposed to be, it's really, it's an embarrassingly low number that was permitted at the time. I mean, it really breaks down to about 3 cubic yards per linear foot compared to the geotubes right next door that run at, 22 to 22 and a half cubic yards per linear foot. The volume at the time was not as much, and it looks to me from what we've gone through that volume was also something that was really designed as more of a cover on the structure to keep it protected, not necessarily functioning the same way as the template for the geotubes do. We can argue the merits of that all day if we want, but that's kind of having dug through the permit history and some of the minutes and things, that seems to be what the discussion was kind of centered around. But I do think this is an opportunity to at least make sure that we're up to snuff on these areas and deal with it. And then I will ask George that question about a notice specific to 79.
Thank you, Jeff. Joe?
So we know how much SPPF has, short of the system, if you will, the littoral system. I think that the applicant needs to say, this is the last time we provided sand, and since then, based on that photograph of 2020, that so many cubic yards have not been going to the littoral system. I think it's starving the system, and I'd like to know that figure. And I think that the applicant needs to provide that for us so that we have some proof of what is not going to the littoral system.
Thank you, Joe. Dwight?
Yeah, Joe, Madam Chair, and Mr. Topham, this recent maintenance, 250 cubic yards were delivered by the owners. Traditionally have had it maintained a couple of times a year in the spring and fall. I can't tell you how much on an annual basis. I just know for the recent maintenance, that's how much sand was placed back in March.
Thank you, Dwight. If I remember correctly, there was difficulty tracking down the actual sand tickets for a lot of these deliveries out here, which I realized was now a previous contracting company, but it might be difficult for them to track down. Yes, Joe?
I thought Toscana provided that information. Am I incorrect in that, Jeff?
I think you're right.
Yes, Toscana was able to provide us the information that we provided for everyone to review. To a certain, I mean, it obviously doesn't necessarily go back to the initiation of this project in 2007, but it's been at least for the last few years. I'm happy to share that with, again, it's up on the town website, and if, Dwight or Glenn or whoever would like to get copies of that, we can provide that to them as well if they don't have.
That'd be great. Thank you.
I have a question, Madam Chair, through you, if I may, to both Glenn and Dwight. Wouldn't it be in the owner's interest to agree to a new NOI under these circumstances if it turns out that the littoral system has been shorted substantially by the original order of conditions?
So if one of you wants to take that, or which one of you wants to take that?
You want to blink?
Looks like Jeff might take it for you, and then we'll see.
That sounds good.
So not to, I know Glenn gets paid by the word, so I don't want to short him. So one of the things that's also been discussed, and something that George and I have talked about at great length, and I know I've spoken to Glenn and to Dwight about it for both this project and the geotubes. And one of the things about applying for a new notice of intent, and primarily the reason why I also wanted to talk to George, is with the town working on a study for something that may or may not be happening in this area, that may be changing directions for what's going on or potentially dealing with that, trying to get a notice of intent to cover without having to overburden the commission with multiple notices of intents for different projects on the same area, or waiting to see what that Arcata study comes out with, is something that we've also discussed. Is, the timing of this for all of these projects is tough, because it's hopefully going to have a little bit more of a clear path to the future and what notices may be coming related to all of these properties for this whole stretch, if there are any, and then seeing where that goes. And I think that's why when he and I talked about this, having some steps through the enforcement order to at least get us to the publication of that study at a minimum was important, because it enforces the conditions of the permit and upholds those, and also can strengthen those. And then when we have a better view of what permitting may be coming, to kind of tackle the permitting at that point, because it's supposed to be here in a few short months. If that makes sense to everyone.
Thank you, Jeff. I think that's definitely a response that we can understand. Ian, does that answer your question, at least partially?
Sure.
Okay.
I don't like, I'm sorry.
Yep.
I don't like that we're going to be sitting around waiting for this, why the site just kind of sits there waiting for some report. I'd kind of like to see it, a new NOI, and we're going to put X amount of sand on this and get it back to its glory. And then if it changes or something, then it is what it is. But I'd like to see this going forward soon.
Thanks, Joe. It sounds like we can condition through the enforcement that they have it covered with sand, that they at least deal with some of these issues immediately.
Perfect.
Well, it sounds like we might wait for more detail. Yes, Jeff?
So sorry if I was unclear when I said it. I think the intent of conditioning it through the EO is to get the site back into permitted compliance and maintained in permitted compliance. And then if it needs to shift gears some, to go through the permitting steps to do that. But we have the ability through the EO to say, the nourishment volumes need to be brought back to where they're supposed to be. You need to provide us the documentation. That work needs to occur. It needs to occur following, providing notice to the commission, providing the sand delivery tickets to verify those volumes. Like, those things can all get put through the EO to maintain that structure. So if I was unclear about that.
No, thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was, Madam Chair, Glenwood, that was a discussion that we had with Jeff and George, and we thought that at least in the interim was the way to go through the EO. That's why we proposed it. But we're aware of the bigger picture, Joe, and we appreciate that there's some holes out there.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Glenn. any other comments or questions from commissioners about the enforcement? Looks like no. Jeff?
I mean, so I think my question is, I think with the information tonight, I think if you guys are interested, I'll get that question to George that you specifically asked Ashley, just to get that clarified, because it would be good to know for other enforcements as well. But I think what I would suggest at this point is that I'll draft up kind of a set of findings to memorialize kind of what we talked about tonight with some of those additions, and then step out some of the conditions to go through, and we'll review that at the next meeting to go through and do that. And I'll see if we can maybe get George here as well to go through the conditions to go on to the EO, and then we can start to move forward from there.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I think that would be great. And then we can expect to have some sort of action at the next meeting.
Right. I think we were just kind of gathering facts tonight and to set kind of a course forward, and then hopefully we'll put those findings and conditions together for the next meeting and get those issued out under the enforcement order at a minimum to get the structure back into compliance and work procedures properly memorialized for everyone to understand what steps need to be taken in the upcoming months.
Thank you, Jeff. Is there anything anybody wants to add before we wait on this for 2 weeks? Looks like no. So we will continue this discussion on May 6th. Thank you, Dwight and Glenn, for being here to talk this one over.
Thanks for your time. Yep, thank you for your time.
All right,
Thank
so
you, guys.
that moves us on to commissioners' comments. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two quick things. The first is at one of the meetings in the past, I mentioned that MyPAG, which is the Massachusetts Invasive Plant Advisory Group, the database they use to review submissions of plants that will undergo review further invasiveness in the future is EdMaps, or also it is can be accessed through the app called Outsmart Invasives. And I mentioned that if people submit records of plants that are considered to be potentially invasive to that database, the state actually looks at it. Well, now I have some real facts that they actually do look at that, because the state has just decided to undergo a discussion in the fall about the potential listing of Scotch broom as an invasive in Massachusetts, based solely on records collected from Nantucket. So the people at MyPAG monitor EdMaps and Outsmart, and it does make a difference. So if there are other invasive or plants that are not classified as invasive right now, but we think they're acting as invasive based on Nantucket microclimates or any local specificity, please record those observations either with the app or on the computer on EdMaps, because the state actually does care about that.
Thank you for sharing that. That's like some happy news that people are following through. So that's really good.
Yeah, it was. I mean, they had said before, yeah, we look at it, but there hadn't been any like concrete evidence. But there is now. They actually do look at it. And then the second thing, I raised this before, I think when we originally had the discussion about regulatory updates, but it jogged my memory of the application that came forward today. I know how the state defines banks that are like not touching the water as not being a coastal resource. If there's like a coastal dune in between the bank and the beach, or the bank and the water, but that classification is a mess. I think we need to relook at that in our local regulations, because that bank might not be technically classified under the Massachusetts Wetland Protection Act as a coastal bank, but it's serving all the same functions and protecting all the same interests as a coastal bank. So I don't know what it would be called, an elevated landform bank or something like that, but we need to look at how we can protect those areas, possibly through local regulations.
Thank you, Seth, for bringing that up, because absolutely some of those like non-coastal banks will be coastal banks in the future. And it is an unfortunate loophole right now. So that would be great to add to our regulatory updates. Any other commissioners' comments?
Sure.
Ian?
If I may. So the picture behind me was a picture taken from our property on 99 Baxter Road. And you can see, can you see? I guess you can't. But that was the 90 steps going down, and you can see the dunes there. And that was covered with Scotch broom. And so one of the unintended consequences of all this erosion was that Scotch broom went out to sea. So there we have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Any other commissioners' comments? Well, I know I have to thank Jeff and Joe. Since I'm on vacation this week, I'm doing a lot more walking around, and I'm noticing a lot of wetland violations just everywhere you go. And they've been great at responding to me this week. Pretty much every day I'm finding something new. So keep your eyes open, commissioners. They're out there.
I sent in an email.
It's nonstop.
We get a fair amount, and we find a pretty fair amount. I don't think we ever go out on site inspections and not find at least one that we have to make a phone call or email. And some of them get as far as the commission. Some of them are easily fixed with see silt fences that are down. Say, hey, fix your silt fence. Do those things. So, but thank you guys for the calls. We appreciate all of them. I do have some updates for a couple of those if you want, Ashley. So
yeah, I think it doesn't seem like there's more commissioners' comments. So we'll give it over to you for the staff reports.
All right. So real quickly, we kind of rushed through it at the end. Hopefully no one minds. There was some public comment that came in on the Baxter Road issue, and we didn't end up doing a public comment session. So not to rehash, but there were a couple questions that we addressed, but one thing that did come up, and I apologize for bringing up this late, and I apologize to Glenn and Dwight, but it's something that they're aware of as well, that the license issued by the town for this project has expired. The issue from the select board to the property owner has expired. They wanted us to make sure that you guys understood that license had expired and would probably need to be renewed through the select board as well. I do know that's something that the permit holder is currently aware of. So it's not like ground shattering news to them. So I don't mind bringing it up now, but it was something that they felt important for you guys to know. And I would agree that it's also something that is important to know that the license expired quite some time ago as well. So that's a bit of a summary of a few of their statements, but wanted to at least get that to your guys' attention. So
Jeff.
Yes, sir.
Madam Chair, through you, Jeff, clarification. This is for 79 Baxter Road?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So is there any questions about that, or do you want me to?
No, I apologize to the public for not hearing their comments when we had White and Glenn on here.
So it's all right. At 8:20 at night, when you're talking about these things after a 3.5-hour meeting, sometimes forget. So, but that being said, just some quick updates. I'm going to try to have the folks from Wilkinson in at the next meeting. We did go out to that site out on Pacomo. They were working on one of the array installs out there, and we're having a groundwater breakout issue. For those, I think Ashley probably sees it the most. I know she's out there a lot. Pacomo is like, personally, anecdotal opinion here, like the groundwater Sepias Beach, kind of on the inner harbor, where we see a lot of groundwater breakout. And when they were doing their excavation, they had some significant breakout of groundwater, to which they just kind of let flow and kind of come around and not wanting to impede it. It's something that we did contact Wilkinson directly. I spoke with the folks on site to say, you know, what are you guys doing with it? How are you treating it? What is your plan? And then I asked them, said, can we please get in touch with Seth to come and talk to the commission about it at some point here in the near future. So they will be in to talk about handling groundwater and if they've encountered it regularly or on other projects and kind of what the procedure is, especially on a beach like that where they see it. The two gentlemen that were there did kind of indicate that it's a pretty regular occurrence on these installations. So I think that's also an interesting piece of information to know that they're encountering it a lot, not just on Nantucket, but also on the Cape and Martha's Vineyard where they're doing work as well, where they're digging into the beach and encountering groundwater that comes out. This one just happens to be a pretty significant flow because it weeps out of the bank on a clay layer that runs through, and then it comes through a secondary layer. So it's something we're kind of actively working on, and I've also kind of contacted Nate at DEP for some guidance about how we should be treating that as well, or if they feel that it's a concern or something that we should be addressing, and how we should be dealing with that. So hopefully we'll get that guidance back, but we were just out there, I think, on Tuesday to take a look at that. Tuesday or Wednesday. There are a couple other smaller ones, actually, that I'll get back to you offline, but I know that was kind of the big one that I wanted to at least get to everybody. But I think having those folks in to at least talk about it at the next meeting would be helpful. I just couldn't pull it together in a day to get them here. So
thank you, Jeff, for looking into that one, because I know during the actual hearings, I mentioned groundwater specifically in that site, and then it seemed pretty significant when I was by there on Tuesday. So thank you.
yeah, it's a lot. When they excavated to get that bottom layer in, is they had more, but then that's when they decided to avoid the big areas of seep and just create kind of openings in their stockpile material to just let it naturally flow as it would flow and not impede it or not try to, save the world by storing it somewhere. They just said it's going to go where it wants to go and we'll just let it be. And was kind of their plan, was just to leave it. So again, that's why we kind of reached out to DEP too, because if it's something that they're seeing commonly elsewhere, I think having some level of consistent approach would be helpful. But other than that, I don't have too much to add tonight. So
thank you, Jeff. If there's nothing else to add, is there a motion to adjourn?
Most definitely.
Is there a second? Seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal?
Aye.
Engelborg?
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding?
Aye.
LaFleur?
Aye, and good night, everyone.
Topham?
Aye, good night, everyone.
Good night. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
thanks, everyone.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.